I'd like to call the instructional meeting for November 4th to order. And the first order of business is the acceptance of minutes. Do I have any corrections? Go ahead, Ms. Havlick.
Yes, Madam Chair. I had a couple of clerical corrections on both of the sets of minutes, which I have already conveyed to the clerk.
Okay.
So it was nothing of substance, just typos and clerical.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, so all those in favor of accepting these minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I was going to say, any abstentions? Okay, so I guess the minutes are good. All right, we have presentation of Mark T. Sheen and Lyman Hall High School to Quebec City, and I imagine that's Kim?
Mrs. Purcell, may I just,
Yep.
Yeah.
just one clarification? It's consensus.
Yeah.
So why don't you
Oh,
just go around to
consensus.
consensus on that?
Oh, thank you, thank you. All right, can we take consensus? And I didn't even say, is there any other discussion? I did ask questions. Can we take consensus on the minutes?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
And yes. Give me one of those, give me an elbow.
Okay.
Okay, now you're up, Kim.
Hi, everyone. Susan Hudson apologizes that she can't be here this evening. It's her daughter's parent-teacher conferences were switched to this evening. She's our longstanding French teacher at Sheehan, and the other teacher that's putting this trip forward is Karima Al-Hamraoui. She's our new French teacher at Lyman Hall, and they are looking to run a trip over a long weekend in March for our French students at both high schools to go to Quebec City. This is a long-standing trip that we've had in the books. We just haven't had the numbers to get it off the ground for the last 2 years. But I was fortunate enough to go with Susan and some other colleagues a few years ago. It's a great opportunity for the students to drive, not fly, to somewhere where they get a chance to interact with the French-Canadian culture, speak the language. If you got a chance to read through what Jump Street put together for an itinerary, there are so many opportunities for authentic interpersonal engagement with the language at a wonderful price that's inclusive of comprehensive trip cancellation insurance. And it's a great opportunity for our students.
Any questions? Oh, go ahead.
So Kim, can you just explain a little bit more about specifically what the kids will be doing?
Sure. So it's a long 3-day weekend in March, and they're getting to see a lot of different sites that are historical and contemporary, and then they're getting to do a lot of sort of play with the language. So they're going to be doing like a supermarket sweep opportunity. They are going to get to engage in a dog sledding, maple sugar making opportunity that happens often in Quebec in the winter. It's leading up to the Winter Carnival in that area, so they'll get to see a lot of the sites that are there, and the itinerary is jam-packed for probably 13 hours a day for them to get to shop and just do sightseeing type things to engage with the language, but also they see reenactments of different historical events and historical sites and lots of good stuff.
Great. And then I just have one question. I'm confused as to whether or not the 2 days, the two school days, it's 2 school days, right?
It's
Is it
one
Thursday
school
through
day. They
Sunday?
leave Thursday at 3 in the afternoon.
Oh, okay, so just the Friday.
Just one day.
So is that an excused absence, or is that one they have to take as
There
unexcused?
actually isn't school on Friday. It's a
It's
PD day.
professional.
So
Oh.
they're not missing
Oh,
any
so they're not missing any
instructional
school.
time.
Okay, perfect, okay.
Okay, Dr. Menza?
No, I was just going to say, as Ms. Moore said, Jump Street is an incredible tour company. When I was principal in Wethersfield at the middle school, we utilized them for our Quebec trip as well as for our Spanish trip because there's a large Spanish population in Montreal. And they did an amazing job, and those students were beat at the end of the trip because, like you said, about 13 hours a day, they are doing activities, but it was very authentic. Which was excellent, and when I was reading through it, because Betsy had sent it out electronically, and there's just such an authentic use of the language on their trips, and I was very impressed by them. So I was glad to see that we're continuing to try to use them.
And it is so much more than sightseeing. They really come from it
absolutely.
from the point of the interpersonal use of the language at breakfast.
And cultural, big
Mhm.
time.
And they're paired with all of these restaurants that sort of cater to this opportunity of providing the students with an authentic experience, but a high level expectation for the students to use what they've learned in the classroom.
All right, Ms. Havlick?
I really like the way that the primary purpose of the trip as related to the curriculum is outlined, making sure that we know about the transferable skills and the learning standards that are aligned with this, because it makes it very clear that this is a good learning experience for the students.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so now we take consensus. Yes, I learned, see? Okay, Ms. Raccio?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes?
And yes.
Thank you.
Okay, next we are going to hear some school improvement plans, and we're going to start with Lyman Hall.
All right, thank you, everyone. I might need to sit down in a minute. Ray was we had our Powder Puff faculty flag football game before this, and I think I got tackled harder than I've ever been tackled before, trying to get into the end zone, and I didn't make it. So the kids were tough. They tied us in the end, and are looking forward to the Powder Puff game here coming up.
Do you want to sit in the chair at the end? There's a microphone.
I'm only half joking about actually. My body is really starting to tighten up right now. Tomorrow should be interesting.
He got hammered by a 90-pound person.
You didn't have to exactly point out how small she was. But thanks, Ray. I appreciate that. So come on up. Aim, Ken. So we'll go through, look at some data very quickly, some of the data that highlighted our plan and some of the things that may help us decide where we're going. I apologize for the background under the slides. I think I do this every year. It looks really great on my computer screen, and then when we project it out, it never quite looks as well. So I do apologize for that. Hopefully you have copies in front of you of the PowerPoint, or at least the plan if you don't. The first part is our cohort data with our PSAT and SAT. And what this highlights is our students that started with us and took the PSAT, as they go through 9th, 10th, 11th grade, and then 12th grade, we can compare the cohort data, which is all those same students that took the assessment, and how well they've improved and performed on each of the assessments. If you look at our total growth, which is that top chart, our students from the fall of 2017 to the spring of 2019 on the SAT grew 100 points on the PSAT and SAT performance. What's great about this is we are performing at or above average of the nation as far as the growth that it goes. And you can also see highlighted in blue is our projected outcome for this year's seniors if they take the test again this fall. Now, we don't offer it this fall for seniors, but many of our seniors obviously will take it, and we still receive those results. So we'll be able to compare those 4 assessments once those seniors take that result. And you can see the growth range is quite the same for both our math and our reading and writing SAT development. Any questions on that chart?
Ooh, that's kind of dark.
Yeah, that's why I apologize ahead of time. I am sorry. It really looks wonderful on my computer screen. So this is our STAR data. Obviously, we're looking at the first assessment for STAR data. The STAR data for us really gets valuable. It is in your chart on page 2 at the bottom. If you look at page 2, our STAR data is on there. One of the things I want to highlight as you look at the STAR, and the reason I put the test takers and the total population at the very end, is because as our students improve and score higher on the STAR assessment, they test out of the STAR assessment. So last year when we had the conversation, it looked like our students were getting worse because many of the students that kind of cap out on the test graduate out of it and do not take it again. And that's one of the things I really like that we do. So once a student has kind of mastered the STAR assessment and cannot perform any better, we don't just arbitrarily test them for no reason. So they have to meet a score for reading in order to test out twice in a row, 2 times consecutively, so they can demonstrate that knowledge and that one time wasn't quite a fluke. And then in math, once they hit a certain level of math courses, which is after Algebra 2, the students are testing out because the STAR assessment does not test those specific skills that we offer, such as statistics, AP Calc, and some of those courses. So that's the math side and how they increase. Obviously with STAR, we've talked about it. Our main focus is that they are growing at or better than the rest of the population. The wonderful thing about STAR is that our students compares apples to apples. So any of our students performing at a certain level are only compared at that growth level to students performing at the same level nationwide. So this is for the first time we could really assess how our top-notch students are growing in comparison to our real high-performing students across the country, and also how our struggling learners are growing compared to students at that same ability level. So it really does allow us to see how they're developing over time. And then if we go to my last slide, this just kind of looks at and sums up the strategic the school improvement plan that you have in front of you. We'll be focusing this year, and I think you've heard this from both the department plans as well as some of the elementary schools, continually improving quality of our instruction delivered by teachers. We have amazing teachers, and the one thing that we're trying to focus on is that we can all continue to get better. This year's focus area will be our high-impact teaching strategies, which I think you are all familiar with. We'll be through department meetings, cabinet meetings, PLGs, and we will be utilizing that time to further refine these practices and identify the priorities among them. As part of our teacher evaluation plan, many of the teachers we've asked to choose the areas that they feel they need the most improvement in according with the high impact strategies, so that we really can focus on that and get teachers the PD necessary through those department meetings, through our faculty meetings and the PLG times to really develop those skills. The successful start to high school. So this is one thing that we're really excited about. Obviously, we had our first year last year, and this is just really an intense focus on our freshman class and making sure that the transition to high school goes well. So in any high school that I've been in, Lyman Hall is no different. The key year for students is that freshman year. And the one piece of data that I want to point out is it was 99.6% of our students earned enough credits to be considered sophomores. So why that's significant, and it's not like an elementary grade. If you're held back, you're held back entirely. We do it by credits. Many students that are typically not officially sophomores are by second semester because they've earned enough of the half credits. But we had, I think it was 3 students who struggled through, and much of it was not academic and more some other issues. But 99% of the class was able to progress and stay on pace for graduation. What we know for sure is if students have a difficult freshman year, whether it be academically, socially, or emotionally, then the opportunity and the likelihood that they will be successful through high school is very difficult. So starting ahead of the game has been fantastic. We saw a decrease in referrals from the freshman year to their sophomore year. So they're maturing and growing quicker, and we're dealing with less of those behavioral issues, which is fantastic. And also through our office hours and advisory program, we run the Freshman Academy specifically for freshmen to learn some of those key skills that they're going to need throughout their 4 years in high school. So we are seeing it pay dividends. Students are performing better, like I said, both behaviorally, academically, and social and emotionally, which is fantastic. And then also we'll be focused on providing supports to those students that receive special education support under IDEA. Specifically, we're looking to support students' identified academic and social emotional needs indicated in their IEPs to increase their performance on a variety of assessments administered throughout the district. So our major push this year has been to revamp what our classrooms look like so that we can really hone in on those skills identified in the IEP that those students need and really emphasize and strengthen those so when they go back to the classroom setting and they're in their math class and their English class, they are continually working on the skills they need to be successful. So those are our 3 major focus areas this year.
Excellent. Any questions? Okay, I just have a couple.
Sure.
Just real quick. The 50% decrease on referrals, is that just freshmen or is that the whole school?
Freshman to sophomore year.
Okay.
So just looking at them, and obviously we'll have more data once the year goes on.
Okay.
So it just, to be perfectly honest, we could have just had a very slow October, September and October.
Yeah.
We don't believe that to be the case, but we will be able to compare a full year's worth of data at the end of this year to see the total number of incidents that we had for the freshman class last year and how they performed this year behaviorally. And obviously our goal is to continually decrease those
Sure.
behaviors and referrals
Sure.
throughout their time.
And I just have to say, congratulations on that 99.6%, because
It's fantastic.
I
We're
know
really excited.
when we, with the innovation team, one of the things we looked at was if freshmen fail like in English, math, like a core subject, that percentage of dropout is huge for them.
Huge.
So this is like such a big thing to accomplish. So whether it's your freshman academy or whatever you're doing, that's awesome.
Thank you.
The only other thing I have is really small. Community partnership. You said Connecticut Food Bank. Is that Masters Manna or Connecticut Food Bank?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
to be honest, we participate in so many different fundraisers and different organizations,
Yeah.
and we work a lot through
Okay.
our agricultural program as well. We have right now a few projects in the works, working on recycled gardens and compost piles, and then a food bank in the agricultural facility that we will be delivering to both the Connecticut Food Bank
Oh,
and
awesome.
Masters Manna.
Awesome. Okay. Anybody else? Oh, Mr. Russ.
Yeah, on the students on intervention,
Sure.
does that number track pretty much the same thing through the middle school to you? Is there an increase or decrease on this?
From the middle school to us?
Yeah,
I couldn't tell you if there was an increase or decrease. Our intervention program is run, I think, pretty similar to the elementary schools. Our goal is to get kids in for a set amount of time, get them the skills that they need to catch up, and then get them out of the intervention model. One of the difficult pieces in high school is we have to balance the rest of their schedule. So we have students that are, taking 7, 8 classes. We have to try and get them out of that study hall in order to get them into the intervention services. It would be counterproductive for us to pull them out of English to give them English support, because it's further setting them up for a little bit of difficulty in those classrooms. So right now we have Mrs. Duda and Mrs. Knickerbocker working extremely hard, getting into classrooms, meeting with kids outside of classroom, trying to catch those students up that are a little bit behind so they're on par with their classmates.
thank you.
Mr. Votto?
Yeah. Just want a clarification.
Sure.
When will the star reading be given again?
So we
You'll
give it,
in the fall.
yep, it'll be winter, and then there'll be a spring assessment.
So will we get a copy of this chart after
Sure,
you do it?
yeah, absolutely.
To see if there's any growth?
Yeah, 100%. We can put it together, we'll send it to Mrs. Latour and Dr. Menzo, and they can forward it on to the board.
And also, do we have a comparison from the students that are presently in 10th grade from 9th grade where they were, to see if there was growth? In other words,
Yes, we have all 3 assessments that they took their freshman year and their sophomore year assessment.
so do you see?
Absolutely, we'll look at both. The first one is kind of tough from time to time because you have a lot of the
Right.
summer slide, and it's not too drastic, but it's definitely noticeable. It really is as they progress through the year. That middle assessment, the one we take in winter,
Yeah.
is really valuable to look at that data and see how far they're progressing. The good thing is if a student's not progressing, the STAR assessment highlights the particular areas that they're really struggling in, and our interventionists can pull that very specifically, and when they're in there, they can hit that specific area that a student is weak in. The other nice thing that STAR does is it separates out those long-lasting, ongoing skills that they truly need from the ones that might be lost but will not impact future learning. So it really, within the STAR program, it gives it a double arrow to emphasize the really important areas that the student is struggling in.
I have a question that probably was never asked, but maybe it was. How are the interventionists evaluated, observed?
So just like any teacher?
I mean, do you just go by the test results, or is there something?
No,
like
really,
any
so
teacher.
it's watching their interaction, seeing the number of students that we have identified, seeing how quickly they're coming in and out of intervention services, and also, they're also getting into the classroom. So I was actually in a classroom briefly today just looking for a student, but Mrs. Duda was in Mrs. Costelli's class, supporting that class because there was a number of students in there that needed to support during their learning and their activities. So they're really doing a wonderful job kind of hitting these students wherever they can, both in the classroom and one-on-one. And they do a tremendous job with small group settings,
Right, so
So-
they're evaluated like any teacher.
like any other teacher.
Sorry, okay.
All right, Ms. Havlick.
Yes, thank you. Listed under your school climate, you'd like to increase parent participation in PTAC. What strategies are you going to use to address that?
So what we've done, obviously we've shared out the dates. I have a Friday email blast that we send to families that reminds them of all the important dates. I have a wonderful PTAC president, Mrs. Vining right now, who is trying to get as many parents as we can. You know, the difficult part and the issue that we have in high school, and anyone who's had a child in high school, we have our band parents who
Right.
probably put in maybe more work than anyone in the building during the band season. We have the athletic booster clubs. We have all the individual department, booster clubs or parent involvement. So it's really hard to pull for some of those additional events because many of our parents are so tasked
Right.
and involved with their specific child and what they're interested in, whether it be a sport, theater, or band. So we're really fighting. We've set it up on off nights. So when the music parents meet, we don't hold PTAC. So that they do have a time. Sometimes we would try to combine nights. Last year we combined 2 nights so that band parents were meeting from 6 to 7, and then we had our meeting from 7 to 8, so we could try and catch some of those same parents. But there's just a lot of time put on parents, and it's demanding, and it's pretty difficult to get our turnout. Our first couple PTACs, we've had a better turnout than we've ever had before. But without getting too excited, that's around 10 to 15 people that come to our PTAC meetings. So anything that we can do to get more people, we've adjusted times. Last year we sent out some surveys to see what we could do to potentially increase participation, but we haven't seen any drastic results yet. But we just want to continue to press, offer more separate events. I think last year there was mentioned of posting some of them online so that people can watch, similar to board meetings.
Right.
But we haven't gone there yet.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Ms. Castelli.
Just a quick question regarding intervention. Do you have enough intervention support? Do you need additional teachers? Because I'm looking at these numbers, especially with the reading, and they're high. That's a lot of kids to
So,
have
I mean,
to deal with.
there's a large part of me that says anytime a board member asks you if you want more people, we just say yes. But we, I think right now we have a good number of interventionists for what we're doing, and I think the district's been really supportive in that if we've ever needed additional support, if our load increases, that they've worked very hard to get us the appropriate staff. I think right now what we're doing and what our teachers are really getting better at is identifying those students early on and then sending them through the SRBI process so we can get them into intervention services. And not every kid recommended needs intervention services. Sometimes it's more emotional supports that are needed, but our teachers are getting better and better at identifying those struggling students early on so that we can catch them before they fall too far behind.
And I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you have an idea of what the normal length of time is that a student will remain in intervention?
That ranges, I would say, quite drastically.
Yeah.
There are some students that are in and out in as soon as kind of 4 to 6 weeks. So we've had a student who started in SRBI already in intervention, already out, quite a few of them. And there are some students that are in there longer, and much of that is also related to some academic, behavioral, and social emotional concerns that are pertaining to a student. So it really depends on the individual student, how long they're in there, and that's where we really rely on the expertise of both Mrs. Duda and Mrs. Knickerbocker for what that student needs. And then obviously if we've done if we put a lot of supports in place for a student and we're not seeing progress, then we look at what additional services outside of intervention that might be needed.
Okay, and then the only other question I have is, I'm kind of surprised to see that there's less intervention needed for math when we always hear how we struggle so much with math all the time. I'm just surprised to see that's almost 50% less than reading.
And again, I think it's just it's not that it's needed less, but we have to start identifying those students a little bit quicker and getting them in. And that number, so right now we have a little bit over 60 students in intervention services, and that number is going to fluctuate throughout the year. It's going to go up, it'll come down, and it will be, every time you get that number, that's a different number of students. So throughout the year, it's very flexible and mobile.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Ms. Raccio?
For your buckets, the at benchmark, on watch, and intervention,
Sure.
what are the brackets? And are they consistent with Sheehan and with middle school?
So those are the same district-wide, the scores. Carrie, do you have those in front of you by any chance? What actually, I do not have them in front of me.
So the intervention band would be anywhere from 0 to the 25th percentile. 26th to 49th percentile is on watch, and then 50th percentile and above is considered proficient.
And again,
that range, sorry, is the same K-12.
Okay. And I just pulled one grade level to kind of look at, and when I looked at grade 12, with the totals that you have here between the test takers and the total grade population, it looks like based on that 19 have tested out. But then when I add together the on-watch and intervention, we actually have more students on watch and intervention than we do at or above benchmark, if I'm reading this right.
correct. No, you're reading it correct.
Wow. And that's graduation year.
Yes.
But that also is a reduced number, as
By
Mr. Cor-
19.
Right,
By 19, right?
but, no, like, the,
Help me.
it starts lower than the 12th grade class, because some kids have tested out already.
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have.
So it's not 12th grade in total, and just 19 have tested out? They may
Come-
have tested out prior to getting to, do you know what I mean?
So what's your total grade population then for 12th grade? And it's
266, 247 students took the test. But remember, they only will graduate out that second time they've taken the assessment and/or are out of the math. That's why you see the math number is much lower. So if you look at the math senior
Right.
population, that's because that's by course. So most of our senior courses are not tested on the STAR assessment, which is why they're out.
Okay, so is it, and I could be totally wrong, so please correct me, 266, and out of the 266, there's 131 that are either on watch or in intervention,
Correct.
and that's the full population?
Yes, that total is of the 266.
Okay,
That's on watch and intervention.
wow, okay.
But you have that 247 took the test.
Yes, correct.
Right.
Yeah,
But
Yeah,
the
it's on there.
total population of the senior class is 266?
Correct.
correct.
And 131 are either
How do you get to 131, Tammy?
the 75 and the 56?
Right.
Oh, gotcha. Oh, she's up here.
I'm looking at reading.
Okay, all right, thank you.
That's why I was asking if you have enough support for the interventionists, because that might be something we really need to take a look at if it's needed.
Right, and so obviously, part of our strategy is really focusing on them early on in high school, and much of our intervention services are focused on 9th and 10th graders, that population of students, so we can, get them closer and close that gap and get them better prepared for their juniors and senior years. Obviously, I don't think any principal would say no to additional staff, but we also have to be reasonable and understanding with what we have and obviously the budget on a whole. We have amazing interventionists that are working tremendously hard right now. And the moment it got to a point where, we felt that we needed to start asking, we present it to the district and say, I think it's time we try to increase our services.
Well, my concern is that we want the Wallingford 100.
Yep.
And we want our
But again, I
certificates to
think
mean something.
You're also just recognizing this is one data point.
Right.
So I'm sure if they disaggregated this data, they looked at that 166, there are students who might be even honor students who didn't do well because they just didn't take it as seriously as they should have.
Yes.
So, and I know that they've sliced the data 6 ways or 7 ways to Sunday. So I don't want to call out those individuals, but I'm sure there are students, and it's not that 50% of the students are on watch or below grade level. I believe, and I see Mr. Daly's head shaking because I know that we've had this conversation. So they've looked at that. So this is one data point that really determines the outcome of the student. So we talk about that with SBAC. So I don't want anybody, suddenly we're putting more eggs in the STAR data basket. We're not. So you have to look at it very, very closely because, again, it's a very short assessment. It's not
about
a
30
long
minutes.
assessment. It's how many minutes?
It's about 30 minutes, and I will say that Sal's correct, that we can identify, and teachers will, they'll look at their students' assessments, and we have kids that finish in a minute and a half. They usually call me up and ask for help at that point, so we'll have students actually go down to intervention to take it. They'll come down to my office and take it, and sometimes we just have to remind them how important that assessment is. And it really does help us track and prepare, and also the better you do, the more likely you are not to have to take it again.
And just for clarification, all 130 or 100 and whatever number of students, are they all in intervention? Or are some of them not in intervention?
No,
because we see it
not
as an-
every student. It says intervention, but that
Correct.
doesn't necessarily relate to our intervention services. It's just a bar on the assessment in which our students fall.
Because some of those students, again, based on that test and then looking at what course they're taking and the course load they're taking and then looking and talking to the teachers, some of those students would never qualify for intervention because they're well beyond the skills necessary
And
to
if you
be
look at what it
intervention.
takes through our SRBI
So
process.
it's a little bit of a false positive or false negative, I guess, whichever way, I don't know.
Well, I think
but-
any one data point is dangerous like
Yeah.
that.
So that's why I
And
just
I
want
agree,
to
I agree. Yeah, and my only concern with this, because to me, this is I don't look at this as a score as much as a tool in identifying kids that need help.
Absolutely.
So I'm not worried about the score, so
yeah,
to speak,
the
you know what I
thing is,
mean?
but the thing is that again, that total population. That's why I wanted Joe to just clarify is that number, that total group of students they're not in intervention. All
No.
of those
Okay,
students, because
okay.
again, some of them, yeah, rightfully so, should be in intervention because they really do meet the criteria, and some of them, for a variety of other reasons, don't meet the criteria because it just doesn't. It's not a true indicator of their ability.
And that's why through the SRBI process, students are identified through STAR assessment, PSAT and SAT assessment, their classroom performance, their teacher recommendations and conversations, and their how the student is performing in class. So we use every piece of data we can when our SRBI team sits down and reviews a case as to whether or not a student needs intervention services.
Okay, great, thank you.
Anybody else? All right, would it help us to understand this better, in the future, if we had the actual number of kids that are in intervention, from at 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, so we could see if kids are exiting or not exiting?
I think it could. The challenge is that some students exit and then go back in later in the year because of just the fact that the assessment changes and the sophistication and the challenge in the assessment changes. So we can look at that data, but it's not just a clear apples to apples because the 9 kids in freshman year might not be the 9 kids that exited. So it's because you might pick up another 9, you know what I'm saying? So the kids change. That's the beauty of it, but it's also the challenge of it.
And also scheduling. So you might have a study hall first semester, so we have that student in intervention, and they might not have a study hall second semester, so it's more difficult to get them that same level of intervention services. So you balance the high school schedule, student need and student want, and our ability to reach the student and get them the extra support that they need.
Right.
And I will just point out, so we have our peer tutors, we call them Trojan tutors. And those are some of our best and brightest students that volunteer their free period to sit in the library and support any student that approaches them for support. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's really a remarkable thing for our students. They often feel way more comfortable asking their peers for support and help. So it's another small intervention that our students have been providing for a long time to each other, which is fantastic and worth mentioning.
Great. Any else? All right, so this is a presentation. Do we need consensus on something like this, or is it just a presentation?
Yeah. It's just
Perfect. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Dag Hammarskjöld, middle school.
Good evening, everyone. I do not have slides available.
Could I
apologize
interrupt
for
you
that.
for just a minute? Would you identify yourself for the TV people?
Of course. My name's Todd Snyder. I am the principal of Dag Hammarskjöld Middle School. Having watched my colleagues on YouTube and the other presentations that have been done over the last couple weeks, and I think I can speak for my colleagues here, as a comprehensive public school system, we try to be all things to all kids. Not just for academics, but also extracurriculars, social and emotional, and we do that as best as we can. What I'd like to do is talk to you a little bit about our data when it comes to STAR, when it comes to the SBAC, and take any of your questions there, and then I'd like to move forward through the other pieces and initiatives that we have, especially the social and emotional. Mr. Corso spoke on this a little bit. Any school is never satisfied with their results, and neither are we. Having seen what Lyman Hall's scores are, and certainly our students move up to Lyman Hall, the numbers are kind of accurate, or at least the trend is there. But we're not happy with it, and we have a number of ways of trying to improve that. We too want to look at improving instruction. One of the things that, and Mr. Corso was really specific about that, going into the classrooms, using data team time, the SRBI time, to make sure that instruction is at high levels. Our teachers are continuing to communicate learning targets so that students know, are able to communicate what they need to know and do. One of the things that we'd like to do is conduct interim assessments, especially SBA. So that's been talked about in the last just few weeks, trying to get students a little bit more test stamina. Let's face it, some of these tests are either the STAR is 3 times a year or SBAC is once a year, and sometimes when they go in to use the Chromebook to take the test, that interface might be a little foreign to them. So we'd like them to take some interim assessments and kind of get used to what they will see when they take the test. But we too, in looking at the data a little more closely, we're confused by some of the results too. In talking to one of my science teachers and really drilling down, we noticed there was one student who was tops in his class, but ended up getting a 1 on the NGSS. And you know why that is. That student is a freshman now, but you know we have to take that into account too. That there are times where sometimes the incentive for taking a test might not be there, and students for some reason or another might not take it too seriously, as Dr. Menzo had pointed out minutes ago. So interim assessments are one idea, and we're trying to also improve the SRBI process. A couple years ago, we took the idea from Moran Middle School, the Hands Up protocol, and trying to identify all students, not just the ones that we know about, and that way we can look a little more closely at the services that we're providing them.
All right, any questions about the data? Ms. Castelli?
I just have a general question. You said something, Ty, that struck a note with me. If a kid comes in a particular day and has an excruciating headache, he came in because his parents, the rule at home is if you don't have a fever, you're going to school.
Sure.
So they're in school and they have this tremendous headache, and we're expecting them to take an exam, to take this assessment.
Sure.
Are they given an opportunity to bow out for that day and take it another day, or are they stuck with it?
Well, I think if when they're in school, and are you talking about the SBAC in particular?
No,
or
the
just
STAR data, the
STAR test?
assessments. I'm sorry,
Yeah,
just the assessments.
we have, when that happens, we have made some exceptions, and we ask students to, maybe retake it again, and that's fine.
Yeah.
There's also times where we notice that a student really went through the test rather quickly, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and that's just not enough. So when that happens, we'll retest that student.
Okay,
And
we have the ability, we
we
can
do.
do that. There's
Yes.
no reasons why we can't. Okay,
Correct.
good, thanks.
Any other questions? I was just going to ask about the SBAC math. Seems a little low, but then the STAR data, and I know that they don't match, but is there anything that kind of jumps out at you as far as those scores?
Yeah, and that's where there was a little bit of disagreement between the STAR scores and
Right.
SBAC.
Right.
It's hard to tell. We
Okay.
were really excited in the winter when those math results especially came back, and then they dropped a little bit. With SBAC being so low, I don't know. What I know is that the subject that students struggle the most with, and it's the biggest challenge, is math. Second to that's world language. And there are times, if you don't know the material for one unit, it's really hard to move forward to the next one.
Right.
So it's hard to tell. And that's why I think the interim assessments are important. So that way the students will understand the interface a little bit better. Because we're already seeing actually a couple of our classes took a math assessment just last week. And one of the students said, well, glad he did it because he noticed that there was a feature on the Chromebook that he wouldn't have known otherwise. So now he has that, and he can apply it for the next time he takes the test. And those interim assessments match with what's going on in the classroom, so our teachers really would like to use it with a little more regularity.
Okay. Ms. Raccio?
Yes, when you talk about the interim SBAs, do you also have Khan Academy?
We can use it. That's another option.
Like, why would we do one or the other, or is there a preference? Because I know that's really not pushed, but that's really encouraged by guidance on the high school level to do all the practice tests, because it tracks, the student can track their own area,
Right.
an opportunity, and kind of customize their program moving forward. What would be the advantage of doing the SBA? Like, how would that data get back to the students so they could have focused areas?
So the SBA interims, they're called focused interims. There's a couple of different methods you can do an interim assessment through the state of Connecticut. But specifically what we're asking the schools to do and what the curriculum coordinators are looking at are the focused interim block assessments. They're short, they're very, very specific, and they're meant to give information back to the teacher instructionally. While the added benefit is the format of the test, the structure of the test, the tools, the types of questions are very comparable to what they'll see in the spring when they take the Smarter Balance. So, for example, there might be one on geometry at the end of the, throughout the geometry unit as the teacher is teaching. Towards the end, they can do the focused interim assessment, and they'll get a very good indication of where the students' strengths are, where the students' areas of growth are, and they can then, through small group, through reteaching, hit those areas to ensure that there's a level of mastery for that student. They're aligned to the standards, they're aligned to the unit, they're very specific instead of this very broad, very comprehensive test like the Smarter Balance that we give in the spring. This really is meant to be very specific to a particular unit of study that is still connected to the standards, the state standards, and to really provide some very intuitive instructional feedback to the teachers. So that's kind of why we're looking at that. Where Khan Academy will look at areas of growth for the student. Both have merit. There's a place for both, but this will enable the teacher when they're looking at their class to kind of understand where the class stands as it relates to a particular concept, and then to be able to structure their lesson planning to hit the needs of the class.
I think the other part is that we consistently hear from teachers, as Todd mentioned at the beginning, that some students just don't measure up on the assessment the way that they know they could on the performance that they see in their classroom. So I think in talking with teachers, the realization is, or the idea is that the format of the test, the understanding how to utilize the computer assessment could be the real gap for some of our students. So I think the teachers have kind of, and I agree with them, I support them 100% on this, see that these interim assessments, these block assessments, these focus assessments really are, again, as Carrie just said, getting at the actual content, but also giving them more opportunity to experience the platform. And we'll see whether or not that is the stumbling block. But we're hearing a lot from teachers, both in English language arts and in mathematics and now in science, that just doesn't seem to connect certain students that they would see as their top students or definitely above average students not having the same success on the SBA as they would anticipate. So I think that we're not alone in this. A lot of districts are moving in this direction, already have moved in this direction. And so I think that's where we're trying to listen to the staff in that regard, because we respect, they see those cherubs 183 days a year, and they know what they either can accomplish or can't accomplish. So,
Okay, not to challenge, but I just want to understand this. What is the difference then from the SBA versus the district performance tasks?
They're all aligned to the same set of standards.
Because it just feels like another test. Like, do we take anything away by doing the SBAs?
The interims?
Or, yeah, the interims.
They're not doing the interims in
No.
for every unit. They're looking at specific opportunities unit by unit. They're collaborating English language arts, math, and science so that the students aren't inundated with assessment, because that's the last thing that we want.
That's what I'm worried about, because we already have all the performance tasks.
the performance tasks are tied directly to the curriculum.
Correct.
So they're and they're tied to the standards just like SBA. So it's kind of like the Russian nesting dolls, that one thing kind of builds on the next. So we're not going to over-assess in one area, but we do need to make sure that we have balance. We talked about this when we talked about the district assessments. We talked about the SBAC scores, and we said that we're not going to drill and kill. You can't drill and kill on the SBAC like you could on CMT. That you could definitely drill and kill, and we could give out the closed reading activities. You could do the DRP. We could do all those things, and analytical math problems, whatever, strand 25, the whole thing. We could do that. This you can't. So it's just giving another opportunity. So it's not adding additional assessment. It's just looking at it from the different lenses, so we can make sure we're covering all of our bases and taking it, from what's recommended by the state. The state has recommended this, and they've done analysis as to how this helps improve students' stamina, improve students' scores, improve students. I just think, not even about their scores, but just an appropriate representation of their knowledge, which is key. And I think that's the whole thing. So it's a composite picture, but the performance tasks are unit related. So that's the assessment of that unit based on the standards, based on the district's curriculum.
All right, Mrs. Lavik?
Yes, this has been a concern of mine, an ongoing concern for quite some time. I brought it up time after time, and now this even points it out. If there is a concern about our above-average students having difficulty with the platform, how does that impact our students with special needs? And what their grades might be, because they're not familiar with
Again,
this
I
as
think
well.
that's all tied into exactly
This
what we're
is-
doing. So I think you're supporting the fact and supporting the direction
Yes.
we're going, and I appreciate that support and that fact that we need to have students have more access to these opportunities.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise, we are creating potentially an unnecessary gap. We're not necessarily, and it's unfortunate because we don't want technology to be the inhibitor for a student to be able to demonstrate his or her knowledge and his or her ability, but sometimes it can be. Some of our students with special needs do have, because if they are already using some assistive technology, that obviously
They might be
transition-
very well schooled, but some are not. And are
Exactly.
there alternative ways of
Yes.
taking the exam, or must it always be taken on computer?
No, there's different
There's
levels
different
of
levels, yeah.
accommodations depending on what the student needs, and that goes for all students. So there are some that are embedded within, some that are non-embedded. Some students with 504s or IEPs have certain accommodations. EL students may have different accommodations accessible to them. And then just the gen ed student has accommodations available to him or her to ensure that they are getting the things that they need while taking this assessment. So, the state has continued to refine this over the last few years. And each year, the district test coordinators go to a workshop to see what's new and to be able to explain it to the different principals at the different buildings to ensure that everybody understands, what the accommodations are, who can access those accommodations. And, they try very hard to be very specific to the individual student as much as possible.
And just to clarify one thing, is that we're not assessing the students in math every week using SBAC. Some districts are. We are not doing that. Some very high-performing districts are, I believe unnecessarily, but we're not doing that. This is very, very, it's handpicked in terms of different units. As Carrie said, it's also looking at to make sure that we're not constantly testing students, because that's not appropriate, because the curriculum has to be taught.
Right,
In
exactly.
order to be assessed. So we have to make sure there's balance. So we'll continue to look at this, but if the state had its recommendations in all districts, we would be doing this on a weekly basis in all content, or at least in English and math, because that has been previous recommendations. They might have shifted, but I know when this first came out, many years ago, that was the statement that they felt that these were, and they're very good. I mean, they do add another layer of data, but that's not where we're going. That's not, and we've talked about that before, because I
Yes,
think
we
when
have.
we said it, I said, if you want our test scores to go up, we can just assess kids every single day and never teach. And you all said, no, that's not what we want. So it's just finding that balance. It's,
Right.
it's
No,
driving a car with both feet, so to
Teaching to the
speak.
test is not what we have in mind. I mean, but I just, for quite some time, I've been bringing up.
No, I agree.
Are we assessing the child's knowledge of computer skills, or are we assessing their knowledge of the material that they would have learned?
And that's always been a challenge. I know when the SBAC first came out, I believe one of the unions, I don't know what state it was Seattle, I think, did both the paper assessment and then they did the electronic assessment, and they evaluated, I believe it was Seattle, it was Washington, in Seattle and Washington, and it said that the paper assessment came back higher scores, and there was a lot of controversy around that. We always try to challenge that, but it's taking one step at a time.
But this new information about your, above average students having a difficulty with the platform, I think is.
Well, and again, it's not
Well,
all
may-
students.
No,
Right,
but
and I don't
some.
think
It's
that's
not,
new.
it's
But-
not, it's not a wide, I mean, we're not saying, but there's,
some.
yeah, there's always some challenges. I think more importantly, and again, it goes back to that, you don't want to make it a high-stakes test for the student or the adults. And that's always a concern, is that, this is not supposed to add additional stress. And there are some students at different grade levels, and, it probably goes across grade levels, that aren't as invested in it because there's not necessarily an attached outcome or consequence. And I hate to say it that way, or reward.
Right.
I've had teachers from the middle schools who have recommended that we tie the outcome of the assessments on giving students one less day to the school year. Or, giving, having some incentivize it. And I don't think that's the direction that we'd want to go. So I think it's always going to be a challenge because there's just not that connection. And that was the same thing with CMT. There were some students who would breeze through the CMT. I know when I taught 8th grade, I would look at certain students' scores and I'd be like, how did they get this? You're like one of my top readers. You're reading, at a high school level, and then, because I didn't like the Zigzag article, because I'll never forget, it was Zigzag the Cat that they had to read, and it was like, it didn't interest
Wasn't
them.
interesting to them.
Exactly,
Yes.
so, that's why it's so important that we always focus on multiple measures, that we don't put all of our eggs in one basket. We look at SBA, we look at our district assessments, we look at STAR, we look at ERLA and English Language Arts, and we look at the composite and say, okay, this student is on track for appropriate growth and appropriate success in the future.
Okay,
All
thanks.
right, Mr. Votto.
Yeah, I want to make sure I'm reading this correctly. Now, you gave the STAR, your school gave the STAR math in the spring, not the fall.
Fall, winter, and spring.
I beg your pardon?
It was fall, winter, and spring last year, as it will be this year too.
But nothing this fall.
We did it this fall, and we're gonna do it in the winter
did
and
do
then
it this
spring.
fall.
Correct.
Every
where
school
is
in
it
our
on here?
district
Correct,
will do
right.
that.
Where is it on here?
It is, you'll have to ask him that.
I just
You mean
see
all for
spring
fall,
STAR
winter, and
results,
spring?
2019.
I just showed the spring, which was the final one that we gave that year. I can provide you fall, winter, and spring of last year, and then moving forward, show all that, but I just wanted to show the final assessment that we gave last year and as a, culmination of what they were able to
And-
demonstrate.
Okay, and I don't see, you just seem to have at or above benchmark. I don't see out of that 15, let's take a look at grade 6, 59%.
Right.
At or above benchmark, but
What about the 41?
how many are are getting intervention?
So,
What percentage? don't-
what I did-
Am I right now?
41%.
Well, isn't there at risk or watch? or
On
whatever?
watch.
Is there another one?
correct.
On
There
watch,
is.
On watch? So there are 3 areas.
Yep.
Right.
Correct.
All right, but you only have the one, correct?
I
not
showed in
missing
this, no, in this particular data point, I was just showing the number of students at or above benchmark in each of the 3 grades for math and DLA. But I broke it out even further down below that of the special ed students, receiving special ed services, and ELL students as well.
But again, out of the 41% that are not at or above benchmark, do you know or have in front of you how many kids are at watch and how many are in intervention?
I do not, but I can
Okay.
find that out for you.
And I think I'd like to have that.
All right, Ms. Castelli.
So, with respect to the kids that have a different first language, do we assess them in their first language at all, or is it all English only?
No, it's a bit of both. We can issue some tests in Spanish, if Spanish is the spoken language, to get an idea of where they are. We're talking about LOSLinks here, which is a progress monitoring tool. So we can really monitor over time how well they're acquiring the English language.
can I just
It's
interrupt
both,
for a second?
please.
LOSLinks is the standardized test the state gives all of our EL students in the spring. And so that is a test to look at their proficiency in the English language. And there's 4 domains to that. The other assessments that we have district-wide, the ERLA, STAR, can be given in Spanish if that is the student's strongest language. SBAC or SBA has accommodations for our EL students that will not allow them to take the entire test in English, but they have different translation methods, whether it's stacked translation where the word is in English and then the Spanish word is above it, and there are other languages as well on the Smarter Balance. There's like 10 or 11 different languages. So IRLA, STAR, district-wide in terms of just some of the assessments that we do to look at progress over time. Those two in particular are English-Spanish. So from there, what happens generally if we have a student who is a newcomer or is at a level 1 or a level 2, and I'm using their Lost Links level, so they're at the beginning stages of acquiring English, the EL teacher or the bilingual teacher in each building will kind of have a conversation with the intervention team, the classroom teacher, the building principal, to determine what the best course of action for that student is in order to get really at what their needs are educationally and instructionally. So for example, if we have a student who might be a level 1 or a level 2 student, they're at the beginning stages of acquiring English, they may not go into intervention right away because their best place is in the EL classroom working on acquiring the language. And it really is a collaborative effort at all levels to determine where the best educational need is, to fill that need, and then to work collaboratively as a school-based team to determine when that child is ready to move on from just language services to intervention services. So there are a lot of different options. Smarter Balance does not allow us to exempt any students based on dominant language. There used to be the ability, if you were within our country for less than a year, you would be exempt from English language arts. They don't allow that anymore.
Because
So-
my point, I think what I was thinking was, if we're trying to identify the skill level of a child in reading,
Yep.
if we can test that in their first language,
Mhm.
we could probably see. I'm sure it
So
would be
that's
very
called
different.
the ENL, which
That's
is,
called the what?
it's ENL. It's the Spanish IRLA.
Okay. Oh, okay.
And so all of our bilingual teachers have that.
Okay.
And so as students come into our schools, we will, if that's the dominant language, we will test them in that to see where their reading skill is.
Mhm.
STAR, they can do STAR reading and STAR math, and STAR early literacy for the younger students can do that in Spanish as well, so that the teacher has a good idea of where their skills are in their dominant language.
Right, because I would think that would help us then
It does
identify
help
whether the kid really needs
tremendously.
intervention or he just needs to learn our language.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
All right, good, thanks.
Any, Ms. Corso?
Sorry, first I apologize for being late. I should know this question, this answer, but does STAR give us the option to have the test read to students with disabilities?
Yes.
STAR will read to them.
Yes, so
Okay.
STAR has audio at every test, so whether it's early literacy, or math. It is available to students as an accommodation through a 504 and IEP. We also look at that accommodation for some of our L students who are newly arriving and who have, again, using Lost Links as kind of a guide, but not as a black and white, this is what we do, but if that is an area of need. Most importantly, through all of the universal screens that we do, it's most important for us to understand where the child's learning is and where it's needed, where their strengths and weaknesses are, and not to be so black and white in its administration that we lose sight of that.
Anybody else? I just have one request.
Mhm.
Different plans have different statistics on them, and they're shown differently. And I know that everybody has their own personal thing they want to put forward, and I get that. But one of the things that I see is, like, we get these plans in the fall. Now, we got them last fall.
Mhm.
We didn't get an opportunity to see the growth in the spring, okay, which, for whatever reason, if we were doing a lot of curriculum or whatever, but it would be nice then to see, like, this September, those scores, so we could act, because we see more of what they lose over the summer than what they gained over the winter.
Right, if you think back to 2 years ago, we did a universal screen kind of day-to-day, fall, winter, spring. Last year, we did not,
Right.
because there were a lot of other things going on,
Right.
we just didn't. So
Well,
this year, we'll go back to it, and
Okay.
you'll have in the winter, again, consistent charts with the data, so you can kind of compare apples to apples of where kids are. We'll do the same in the spring.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Are we,
Oh, sorry.
Did we talk
Go ahead,
about, did I miss talking about accelerated math at the middle school at all?
We didn't talk about that.
I'm curious, we have accelerated math at the middle school, but I'm curious why only math is the only accelerated option offered at the middle school level.
Can you repeat your question again?
We only have accelerated math at the middle school. Like, why isn't there
It's
accelerated?
traditionally been the case. There's no other answer except that we didn't even have accelerated math when I arrived. So that's what the first class that was put in place because of the fact that in talking with the high school staff and looking at the whole trajectory of a student's course towards math, it's pretty much unfortunately becomes somewhat of a fixed course. And so in order to progress students along that path, that was the course that was chosen to move forward. The other areas have not been brought up. We've had conversations, but they have not been brought forward. I think that again, it's a challenge because you have the balance between middle school model, which is more about heterogeneous grouping, versus more of a grouping model. But the math was the first one. That was the one that I brought forward with the team, our curriculum department at the time. And the staff was in support of that. So that's the history, not to say that we can't look at other areas. The challenge that you as an educator know that as soon as you start carving out different levels, you create de facto segregation sometimes, and segregation not only cultural but also ability. So the thing is you have to be very careful, and your schedule becomes like a high school at that point where your teaming model becomes challenging. Because you might have you might have groups that because a student is upper level in 2 classes, it locks 2 periods, and then your social studies, which tends to stay heterogeneously grouped even through high school, could be the bubble class where you might have large classes, larger than what you would want classes. So something to consider if that's the direction that we were asked to consider.
Okay. All right, I know, Mr.
That's just
Snyder,
the
you wanted to
history.
go to the social
And I'm not saying
emotional.
it's a good, I'm not saying what I said, I'm not saying that it's a good answer in the sense that why it hasn't happened. I'm just saying that that's what the history was. But I also know that from a teaming model and talking and knowing staff at both schools and also the history of middle school in general, that's always a challenge. But I don't know, Mr. Snyder should probably respond as building principal also.
Yeah, I would argue that even world language is a progression of
That's what I was gonna
different
say.
levels as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with you. I think that the model itself in middle school is about heterogeneous grouping, and we just don't, outside of math. Please.
I agree. I think math is probably the area that's, I can't get it right.
It's hard
You
to
think
say.
after all these years.
It's
I-
on.
What was I gonna say? There are those children that you can see in math that I think move at a faster pace and are probably ready for, say, Algebra 1 in 8th grade, where the majority of kids are not. So, you're almost forced to go back to homogeneous grouping because of that fact. The question, to me, the question always is, which is better, homogeneous or heterogeneous, And of course, you create that label sometime if you do have homogeneous group, you have the low group and whatnot. So I think there are a lot of issues that come into place, but I'm glad to see that we at least do it in math. Because there are kids who are ready for algebra in 8th grade, and there are many who are not. And I would hate to hold back those kids. But you were asking if it was another
Well, I'm just
subjects as
curious
well?
why it's just math. I hear you on the history, and I understand the philosophy. I'm concerned when we look at vertical planning that we have 8th graders who are in a completely heterogeneous group and then go into an AP, which is really a college level class as a freshman. And I think that there are kids that are accelerated readers who could benefit from a homogeneous group in the same way that our math students are in an accelerated math. I think it's worth a discussion at some point.
Sure.
Sure.
Sure. I agree. No, I
So, you know, if what we're seeing across the board were really, you know, above average test scores across the board, then I could fully buy into the heterogeneous model, and we don't see that. You know, and it's through no fault of anybody's. I'm just saying the way, I'm not convinced that the way the middle school model is set up is the best. And I have 4 kids that are completely across the spectrum, and some are gonna be accelerated and some on a personal level, and some are not. And I could see the benefits for all of them in many different ways. I just think it's worth more of a conversation as we move forward. Thank you.
Okay, anybody
That
else?
really wasn't directed specifically towards you, Mr. Steiner. It was just middle school in general.
All right. We've kept you up there a long time tonight, Mr. Snyder.
Okay.
You had said you wanted to break into, Mr. Ross, you had a question?
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
off that subject, on the student attendance and the students that don't like being in school, I'm amazed that half the students at any given time don't want to be there.
Well, the trick to that question, you know,
Well,
when we-
I'd like to hear.
I would argue that any time, anybody who has had knows an 11, 12, or 13-year-old, and you ever ask them, what'd you learn in school today? We get that textbook answer, right, before I could even finish the sentence, nothing. So yeah, actually, I'm kind of looking this as a glass is half full, because, you know, 50% are saying that, you know, it's all the time or most of the time. We want to decrease that as much as possible. So it's probably a nice segue into some of the things we're doing socially and emotionally, which is, you know, we want all kids to feel comfortable and being welcome in the school. We've done a number of things. PNN, our morning live broadcast, is really one of the hidden secrets of Dag Hammarskjöld. When I got there 3 years ago, I think there were 15 students involved in the morning production. We've expanded it. It's up to, I believe, 45 now, which is great. The kids getting involved. We offer a lot of different activities, extracurriculars as well as sports. But we'd also like to institute a school store. We're in the process through Family and Consumer Science and the 7th grade curriculum, which focuses on financial literacy, focusing on the development of a school store. So we want to do it right, though. And what are those products there? And really, when you're talking about the development of a school store, there's a lot of real-world applications there. You're talking about inventory, what the customer might want, for that matter, getting that feedback. But also the dollars and cents and the accounting of all of that, and plus the purchasing and ordering that goes into it. So we're in the process of that. And we're partnering also, a bigger partnership with Wallingford Youth and Social Services. They have created a display in the front of our building as you walk in, talking about anti-drugs, anti-vaping, anti-alcohol. We're going to have assemblies on that matter, as well as online safety. But that's a little more of a push with Wallingford Youth and Social Services. We're also, and both high schools and both middle schools, with the Sandy Hook Promise. After that assembly that we had in September, there were a few students, and I know that there was students from all 4 buildings went to Hamden High School just a couple weeks ago, and we have some ideas that they brought back, and we'd like to continue that as well. Advisory is obviously continuing, and you know, we choose lessons you know, that are fitting for advisory and try to meet their needs wherever that be. Some of those lessons are also seasonal as well. So depending on the course, where we are in the year, we might have lessons on thankfulness and being grateful in November versus, you know, getting ready for summer and those June lessons. We also have, in terms of PD, for our teachers, I was lucky to schedule Joanne Freiberg. She used to be with the State Department of Education, and she has since gone on her own, but I've known her a little more than 10 years now, and she's going to be with us in December next month for a PD with our teachers. She's going to be talking about trauma-induced, the trauma that our students have, and trying to address that. And then she's coming back also in February, talking about restorative practices and school climate. So we're grateful to have her, and we're looking forward to learning what we can from her.
All right, Ms. Havlick?
That's a wonderful segue into my question about, and looking at restorative practice, et cetera, into the amount of in-school suspensions and out-of-school suspensions, which seem inordinately high. And I was looking at the Moran numbers, which are a little bit, well, somewhat significantly lower. But I'm just wondering, aside from our own middle school, how do we compare to, or maybe you don't know this data, other middle schools? And is this a particular cohort issue with a group that's going through at this point? Or what, I see some of what you would attribute it to, but I'm just saying, moving forward, how are, these numbers are quite significant.
Correct. One could make the argument that we are addressing the behavior on the spot. You know, that I like to think that we're pretty responsive with that. But as I mentioned in here, we did have a number of 10-day OSS.
I did see
and
that.
was, you know, per board policy that we had to do that, so
Right.
that jacked the numbers up a little bit. But you're right. I think there are some cohorts of students who keep us busy. But you know, it's hard to really tell that. I do want these numbers decreased, but I also don't want to have them decrease by virtue of not addressing some of the behaviors there.
No, clearly we
so-
want to address the
Yeah.
behavior. It's just, I was just wondering if you could tease out some additional information as to why the numbers were so high. I saw some of the explanation, and that's clear, but that's why I was wondering if it was a certain cohort of students or something else, or.
Yeah, I wish there was trying to find the words. You know, there are behaviors that we deal with sometimes that, you know, become larger problems. Our students are wonderful, but they also make mistakes. Our job is to allow them to see the outcome of their behavior, but also to assign consequences. But also for them to see the outcome of, you know, what that meant. But we do have a lot of students who, you know, they might have a series of consequences early in the year, but they learn from that. There's a number of students in the 8th grade now who I'm thinking about with great pride. Those that maybe kept me busy last year or in 6th grade and have since kind of, well, matured, for lack of a better word. But, you know, I like to think that through some of the initiatives that we're doing, and knowing those students well enough and getting them involved in such a way where they can spend their time more usefully.
Right. Is there a breakout of a grade level as to how these suspensions went?
I don't have that.
I was wondering
but
if you could get that, so that maybe we could see a progression, maybe that there were some concerns in 6th grade, and then they resolved in 7th and 8th grade. I'm just
Yeah.
wondering if that's.
Or like repeat
Exactly.
offenders type thing, too.
That,
I can get that for you. You're talking about last year's data and breaking it
right,
out by
I'm just,
grade?
I'm just trying to
That's-
see if there was, you know, if there's something we're doing really well and it worked well for the group. And so you see a progression of, okay, 6th grade, we had some issues, but 7th and 8th with those students went really well.
Yeah.
Or as Mrs. Purcell was saying, do we have folks that are a little more chronically visiting you?
We have a bit of both. I can tell you that, and I can get that data for you. That's not a problem.
Thank you so much.
Sure, you bet.
All right. Ms. Castelli?
So, Mr. Snyder, I just want to say kudos to you and your team for aggressively addressing this issue. You're dealing with that age group of kids that are pushing the envelope.
Right.
They've got to learn the boundaries. They don't know where they are. And if you just shut your eyes to it, to just make the numbers look good, that's not helping kids.
Right.
And we're all about helping kids. So kudos to you for being honest and making sure that they're being aware that certain behaviors are not acceptable and that there's consequences with them. So thanks for reporting.
And try
it.
as we might to be timely and responsive to those things, because we really do pride ourselves on addressing things right away. Try as we might, it still it feels like that's not exactly, you know, changing the behavior, because, you know, they are 11, 12, and
Right.
13. they make mistakes. And, you know, we're here to teach them the outcome of that.
Mr. Russ? Mr. Russ?
Okay. Absenteeism. What's considered chronically absent?
By the state's measure, it's when they are absent, 4 unexcused absences in a month, I believe, and then it's 10 in the course of a year.
That's truancy, that's not chronically absent.
Off the top of my head,
10%.
18 to 8?
180, yeah.
So it's,
of the month.
it's 10% of the month.
Okay,
you
so
would-
2.5 days?
Depending on how many school days, so on average, it's about 3 days. Or it's actually less than 3 days, it's probably on average, it's about
2 days.
2 days.
And because I'm noticing that the percentage of kids that don't want to be there is substantially higher, so I'm guessing that you're doing something right that they come to school every day.
I'd like to think so,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's, I was
But-
just noticing that.
Yeah, but you know, these, the data really doesn't, I like to think it's better than the national averages, but, you know, when it comes to attendance in the workplace, that's an issue. But I am confident in these numbers, and in those students that do have a difficult time coming to school, we know who they are. And those who have chronic absenteeism, we have plans in place for them, and we work with Wallingford Social Services, Mandy Miranda, Gary Redmond, do a great job at working with those families. Sometimes it does run in the family, you know, where the families themselves have a hard time, you know, getting to school across the board. So we work with those students and those families with a pretty fair degree of regularity.
Can I
Ms.
just
Corso?
add, oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Corso.
I was just gonna add, so, schools used to be able to file when kids were chronically absent, this family with service needs form. And the state doesn't allow schools to file that anymore, and it was basically for the schools asking for help for the kids. And now that it has to all come through the schools, so, you know, all the help has to come through the schools first. The parents can file, but it typically has to go all through Mr. Snyder or whoever first. So I think that's a even bigger burden on the schools at times. So I think it is really important that we identify the kids that are chronically absent, and working with the town services is really important in helping that, because we don't have that resource to turn to anymore that we used to. And on another note, my middle school kids love middle school. My own children at home, they love middle school. I never thought I'd say that. I never thought, like, you know, early adolescents, they love going to middle school, so.
You just jinxed yourself.
Right, knock on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right,
Can I
anybody
just
el-
add that for chronic absenteeism, it is the 10%, but it includes excused, unexcused, suspension, in-school suspension. So that is all calculated into that number, just so you are aware. Pardon?
We have a pretty new policy.
With attendance, yeah.
Right.
But it's 10%, the student's out more than 10%, then it's more than
Yeah,
chronic.
it doesn't matter what kind of absence it
Yeah,
is.
thank
Yes.
you.
Anybody else? All right, I think do you have anything else first? We can let you go.
I'm okay.
Thank you very
Thank you all
much.
very much.
Thank you. Ms. Corso, you want to take over?
No, you're good, sorry.
Okay.
Spoken a lot already.
We have Moran left next.
Okay, good evening. Joe Piacentini, I got you, Mr. Ross. I was ready for that question. It's probably the only one I'll get right away. Joe Piacentini, building principal at Moran. We have Dan Baloney here as well, who's going to be joining us as our assistant principal at Moran Middle School. Much like my two predecessors, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the strengths and weaknesses we've seen with some of our Moran data, and then some of the things we're going to look to do about that. One of the luxuries we have, our colleagues have them as well, is our subject area coordinators. We have them in English, math, social studies and language arts. The process started over the summer with those 4 individuals, myself and Mr. Bologna, where we started meeting with them, looking at how our data panned out from last year, going back to what Ms. Purcell said. We did sort of look at that progression last year and how we did on last year's school improvement plan and some of the data points we wanted to work on last year. So we started our conversation in that group of 6, looking at the previous year's data, making sure that we hit on some of the targets we were looking to hit on, and then making sure we addressed some of those things we didn't quite get to where we wanted to be. And then that conversation continued into this school year as we've gone along. We met with them several times. It's actually a fantastic group of 4 individuals. We've worked with them for a number of years now since we got that resource back. They're very tremendously thoughtful. Some of them have a deep dive into the data that they love to get into. We have our science coordinator, Mr. Baker, is really a data nerd, for no better way to put it. He comes up with some charts that I wouldn't even think of. And then all of our coordinators come up with some very thoughtful ways to look at student data. And obviously they all have a very, very strong knowledge of our curriculum, current and past, which is great too. So I was looking at that. We have the typical things we're going to target, but we're going to target them in a little more specific ways this year as opposed to previous ways. I know you have our goals in front of you, so I'm not going to read them to you verbatim, but we're looking at literacy, math, and science as our 3 focus areas. In literacy, we're really going to look at reading comprehension. It says drawing inferences, citing text evidence, and determining the meaning of words and phrases. It all backs into reading comprehension. It's a weakness we see throughout the progression of middle school. It's something we can tackle in various classrooms, not just our language arts classrooms. Obviously, it gets brought into the humanities in general, so we'll look to attack that in our social studies classrooms. Some of our science teachers even jump into that. Our world language classrooms do that as well, and then our encore classes, as it is relevant to them, we'll do that. For math, we're looking at mathematical reasoning and problem solving. So as you've heard in numerous conversations from I'm sure Ms. Latour, Ms. Medancy, math is no longer just about solving the problem, getting an answer, and walking away. We want students to be able to understand why that answer came out that way, how it makes sense, if it does make sense. So that's where the mathematical reasoning comes into, and that's something we'll look at as well this year as a strength and a weakness. And then in science was a little challenging. The data in science, NGSS is not a long-term assessment yet, so looking at that data, we can't get that progression that we'd like to get amongst the grade levels. But through the combination of what we did have access to in NGSS, our Smarter Balance data, and then our STAR data, our STAR math data in particular, we're going to look at the students' ability to synthesize that data, charts, graphs, tables, and then come up with an assumption based on that data in the classroom. For school climate, we're focused on student climate, obviously. A lot like Mr. Snyder said, we're looking to look at specific questions within our school climate survey for students, and then specifically building student capacity to overcome strengths in the classroom. Not trying to be cheesy, but the idea of perseverance, which is behind me, is definitely something we're looking to get into our students. They're going to struggle, particularly in middle school, as you all alluded to. It's a time of great transition. I know Mr. Corso talked a little bit about that transition to 9th grade. I'd almost argue that transition from 5th to 6th grade is more challenging to a degree, going from a very limited number of teachers to a wide variety of teachers, and no matter what, a wide variety of teaching styles and expectations for those students. So we want to make sure that they have the capacity to overcome some of those early struggles, and that we're meeting them at their level. And then when it comes to our school climate, I'm just going to switch over for me for a second. We're looking at 2 particular areas: their ability to feel comfortable sharing their thoughts and ideas at school, and then their ability to have a trusted adult in the school. And for me, that's the bigger one. Todd alluded to our responsive advisory program. That's really been big for us. It's been a great help to our students and our staff to have a different relationship than the traditional classroom teacher relationship, to have a cohort of 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students that they follow throughout the 3 years there, get to know them at a different level. As Todd said, we do our lesson plans with them that involve, again, making sure that they have a trusted adult to go to in school, so that our school counselors are great resources for them. I'd like to think Mr. Bologna and I are trusted resources for them. All of their regular classroom teachers are, but there's an extra adult. There's always going to be somebody there that they can talk to about any struggles they may have. So that's what we're looking at as far as student climate goes. Technology, as you know by now, we have students all have Chromebooks as they enter the middle school. We're looking to move beyond just the usage of those Chromebooks in the most basic of ways. We have really made a big push. It started last year, but moving into this year with Google Classroom. Google Classroom is a great tool for them to collaborate with their students in all settings. And what we're trying to do this year, and it's been a transition, so we're definitely not there yet, is to get parents more involved in Google Classroom. I know where I live, I try to do that as well. It's a great way for me to see what my son and his teacher are talking about, the assignments he's doing, the feedback he's getting, and what he's able to share with that teacher and what she's sharing with him. So we're really trying to increase that communication and have all classrooms use Google Classroom at a deeper level. Social emotionally, obviously, all of us are going to talk about it. Our SRBI process is tremendously important to us. The ability to talk about students and talk about, as Todd alluded to, our hands up process where we try to talk about every middle school student. We try to ensure that every middle school student has a moment in our SRBI process so that if there is a concern, even from one adult, it doesn't get passed up, it doesn't get lost, it doesn't get missed. And then through that SRBI process, we come up with targeted interventions. So that's very important to us. At this point, I'm going to turn it over. Mr. Bologna is going to talk to you a little bit about the data points that we were looking at from last year, partly from this year, and then moving forward.
And I have to apologize if you see me swaying back and forth. I have a 5-month-old child at home, so I don't know how to stand still. It really helps him. So there's 2 5-year-olds running around at the same time, so I'm always standing still. So what I have for the data for you is just kind of an overview of the different points we've used. But really what we have asked teachers to do this year, along with the help of our subject area coordinators, is to look at a more in-depth level of what this data shows. So in other words, if you're seeing a student who is in the on-watch or intervention range, whether it be from reading or from math, where those struggles lie. There's a report that our teachers like to use to show, based on the different domains within the reading or math test, where students are and how much students are expected to grow. So really asking teachers to get really familiar with both the way that data is presented by both of these and what it translates to within the classroom. And we need that this year to be shared amongst all staff. We're not just talking about the ELA teachers and the math teachers looking at this data. This is a community effort for the whole building. We have plenty of Encore teachers that use the various reports that STAR has to look at domains that exist within their particular classroom. We've made the emphasis this year that there needs to be widespread use of this data within classrooms to make sure we're using effective small group instruction. This could be using SBA data, it can be STAR assessment, it can be district assessments, whatever it may be. And I did want to put up, this is not, like we said before tonight, these are just data points that exist in isolation. We try to put them together to get a wider idea of what the student is capable of. We do see sometimes that there are discrepancies between how the students perform within the classroom versus how they perform on STAR versus how they did in the spring on the SBA test. As far as additional data that's up there, we have our discipline data. I don't have on there what the total number of days are for those suspensions. I can, of course, get that for you if you need it. Those numbers on there are the actual instances of when there was an in-school suspension, when there was an out-of-school suspension. Our attendance data, and I was going through the plan today, I noticed there was something that was omitted on the school improvement plan. There's a statement on there that's hidden by the attendance graph. I think it's something like if students with chronic absence are taken out and there's a blank there. If we take out students who are chronically absent, the average number of days in which students are out drops by over 1 day on average. So if we took out those students, the 34 who are considered chronically absent, our average number that students are out goes from, per grade level, from 5.5 to about 4.5. So just an interesting data point to take out those particular students. I like to think that the goals that we have established around climate pertain to students coming to school and being comfortable sharing ideas. And I think one of the big things that we mentioned at the beginning of the year is if you have an idea to improve the school, come forward with it, whether you be a student, whether it's an adult. I mean, we've had several students come forth this year. We started a after-school volleyball club for students because there wasn't that opportunity. That was completely created on behalf of a student. She brought the idea to Mr. Piastantini and myself, found an adult willing to supervise those students are there, and I think now it has about 20 kids doing that twice a week. So we tell students all the time that the biggest two things that you can do is be in school. I do tell them that I didn't miss a single day of middle school and high school. Yeah. Mm.
Impressive.
Senior skip day, I was there. Might have been because I had a baseball game, but regardless, I was there. But to also feel comfortable sharing thoughts and ideas and making sure that there's at least one or more trusted adult within the building to share their ideas, share their concerns with.
Questions, Ms. Levick?
Yes. So I'm looking on page 8 of administration will provide time for teachers to work in instructional data teams. Are you employing substitute teachers during those times, or you're taking over the class? How is that being done?
I would love to take over a class. You're absolutely correct. No, it's instructional data teams, collaborative team time, team meeting times. Those are all built into the traditional schedule. So they occur, those meetings occur while the students are in their encore or specialty area courses. And for the encore or specialty area teachers, they occur while they're on their team time. So there's no lost instructional time at all.
There's no additional
Right, there's
time
no
required.
lost instructional time and no additional coverage needed for those.
That's why I was wondering, because it said administration will provide time for teachers. I thought, well, is there additional time outside of the schedule, or this is built into the schedule?
Right, so by
then?
provide time and via the traditional school day schedule we have.
Okay, thank you.
Which to plug it in back to, a couple of years ago when we built this new schedule, it's really been advantageous to teachers, this new schedule, for that reason alone. Not only is there data team time, SRBI time, which occurs during some of the team time, but the ability to collaborate with their teachers, what we obviously collaborative time we call it, has really been a great resource as well. So two teachers that might not have an opportunity to meet through data or not on the same team can collaborate on an activity they have coming up or a new unit of instruction that they wanted to just go back and forth on how that's going to be taught. So yeah, but it all is within, like I said, built into the schedule.
Right, the way you had it worded, I wasn't sure, and so that's why I thought I'd ask if you were going to require additional resources for that, or if it was within the schedule.
Nope.
Well, that's good, and I'm happy to hear that's working out time-wise for more collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. To look at the action plan, those are going to be our two biggest tools, I think, is our SRBI time, so that we make sure we're targeting students, and then the data team time, so that the teachers have an opportunity to work through all the numbers we give them and all the numbers that the district gives them, STAR, Smarter Balance, ERLA, and all the different opportunities for students to produce data for us. Those are going to be our two biggest tools, where we talked about earlier in the year, everywhere across the district, we talked about high impact teaching strategies. We expect those conversations to occur during SRBI, to occur during data team time, to occur during collaborative time, so that we're all on the same page and we're using best practices in every classroom.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Votto?
Yeah, I wonder if you could just walk me through on page 4, for instance. The bottom of the page, the math data for the SBA.
Yep.
Let's just take 6th grade. Students tested 183, percent 3 or higher. Can you explain that?
So when they're given the SBAC test, you can either score a level 1, 2, 3, or 4.
Okay.
What the state what it's established as a passing guideline is a 3 or a 4. So that's why on that graph, both the 3s and the 4s are the same color. They fall into that total category of percent 3 or higher. So whenever we are looking at SBAC and how we get those results, level 3 is seen as that level of proficiency that we're looking for.
All right, now, I'm trying to look at the graph. It's hard.
It is, look at the numbers above.
it's all the same color.
Yeah, it's difficult to discern.
You don't have it on there either?
I don't have it up on this presentation, no, I do not.
All right. And you also don't have, with your STAR kids at watch and those with intervention?
I'm sorry, say that again?
All right, let's look at page 2. The 644 is the scale score, correct?
Correct.
45 out of 100 percentile?
So those numbers are the average scores that we see from that entire grade level. So the average scale score for 6th grade is 644. The average percentile rank, which looks at all of our students compared to all other students taking the STAR assessment nationwide, Their average percentile rank is the 45th. And then the average grade equivalency for sixth grade is 6.2, which translates to sixth grade,
Yeah, I
second
got
month
that.
instruction.
This was taken in the fall?
Yes.
Right, yeah, it was. But again, we don't know how many kids are at watch or how many kids are receiving intervention.
So that graph
Out of that 202, or do I?
that graph below, where it shows 31, if we're looking just at sixth grade, 31%, then 24%, then 45%. That bottom 31% are the students who fell in the intervention range. That 24% are the students who fell in the on-watch range. And then the 45% is students at or above average.
Just one other comment. Your statistic, not one case of bullying for the whole school year last year?
There was not one case of verified bullying. Now, that doesn't mean that
Not
there wasn't
one case throughout the whole school year?
of verified, no.
Wow, that's something. Pat yourself on the back
I can't read.
Okay. Ms.
My arms are too short.
for middle school.
Ms. Castelli?
So you made reference to 34 chronic absentees,
Yes.
kids that are absent chronically. Do we know a lot about their home life?
Yes.
Okay, so we can.
I would argue to say we might know more about their home lives than we do the general population because of the fact that they are
Well,
having
I'm
struggles
glad to
getting
hear
to
that,
school.
because that's what I would be looking for, is those are the kids you need to focus on, is
Yep.
finding out why the absenteeism is occurring, and if you can not justify, but you know what I mean, understand the reasoning, and then what can we do to help mitigate that situation. I know we have one social worker and one psychologist for each of the grammar schools. What do we have at the middle school
The
level?
same thing.
Oh, we do, okay. And I'm sure they're quite busy.
Yes, they are.
All right, thank you.
The support staff is a tremendous
Yeah.
resource. It really is. They're committed to making sure those students, all students, but those students especially, we get them in the building.
Okay.
And then they're comfortable within the building.
And there's actually more resources at the middle school, but than just one-on-one, right? You have,
We have three school counselors,
yes,
one school social worker, one school psychologist, and one speech and language pathologist.
okay. But the key thing is that we just don't want to forget the counselors because they're such a big part of this. They're actually.
Because we don't have that at the grammar schools.
Exactly.
Right, gotcha. Okay.
So that was just, I want to make sure because that's a big difference. The
And
other,
this- in the school counselor's loop, so that intimate knowledge of those, their particular, 150 to 200 kids is really tremendous because they have that opportunity to get to know them as they move along. So, and that's specific to the school counselors, the loop.
and all the schools, as was mentioned earlier by Mr. Corso, by Mr. Snyder, and I know would be reiterated by Mr. Zacco and his team as well, is the fact that the youth and social service connection is really key, as well as also our medical advisor, Dr. Valentin, is sometimes brought in because of a variety of issues that might occur in the family. So it's a very collaborative effort, but as Ms. Corso mentioned before, really not having that, family with service needs ability that we used to have is really a challenge for school districts because it did put all of the onus and responsibility back on the school district. And it was a matter because those forms went to DCF, and DCF, as we know, has gone through a variety of transitions and changes and modifications over the past several years. And we invited actually DCF in, and I remember sitting in Moran's Media Center on our district attendance committee, and we invited them in, and they explained to us that they were no longer allowing, districts weren't allowed to do that anymore. And it's really, I think it's a credit to our staff that they've stepped up because the cases certainly have not gone down. If anything, we've seen an increase in students that the families are experiencing some difficulties. That's why we have collaborated with Child Guidance also through the CBITS activities with students. That's wraparound services for families as well as students. So we've really accessed a lot of free resources to be able to augment what we're already doing. But it's a challenge, and I do commend all of our staff across the district because getting the students in the building is the first step, and then educating them is the next. But they have to be socially and emotionally prepared. And that's why we're doing tomorrow, the elementary staff is, much of our elementary staff is receiving the trauma-informed instruction and some de-escalation strategies. We're continuing to do that throughout the district because it is becoming really a norm in not just Wallingford, but across the country and internationally. So we do need to be best prepared. Not only are we trying to have teachers and professionals be ready to educate, they also need to be there to offer those additional supports, which is a lot to be asked of. But we're very fortunate that we do have a community. We'll have SCOW come to meetings if that's appropriate. So we'll have a variety of different entities at those meetings, because we try to make sure that the student is at the center of the conversation, and it's always important to get those different voices that might know the student from a different perspective, or the family from a different perspective, or connecting the family with a resource they didn't even know was available to them. So we also are working, Amy has been kind enough to take on the role of McKinney-Vento that I stepped in for last year, which is our homelessness requirements. And there's the YETI, which is the Youth Education, I know, I never could get it right, but it's a group transition. It's basically homelessness of youth in our community. So middle school, high school students, as well as elementary, but predominantly middle school, high school, that might be sleeping on a friend's couch or a neighbor's couch or an aunt's and uncle's couch. So it's an opportunity to access some resources for those individuals too. So we've really tried to step it up, because obviously when the need arises, you need to make sure you go into overload in terms of providing those resources. So I think we're positioned well. It's not getting any easier. As you know, we got our first, because it ties into truancy, is the homelessness piece. We had our first McKinney-Vento grant last year. We got it again this year. And so that money is going towards additional resources as well.
All right, I have Ms. Raccio, then Corso, then Mr. Ross. So Ms. Raccio.
When you mentioned verified bullying, can you define what that term is? And do parents, did I take your question?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. And do parents have access to the bullying form? So if there is an incident, they know how to fill it out? Because I know Mr. Snyder has it on his website, and I can't find it on any other website. So I always send everybody to your website if they call me and ask me.
So to answer the second question first, it is available on the district website. And we do make it available to any parent who asks for that paperwork.
Okay.
The first question, the difference between verified and unverified, would mean at the end of the investigation, is it an event that, is it something that was a one-time event? Is it something that has been pervasive throughout the school year, throughout multiple school years, in order to have a negative impact on the student's learning? And that's a determination not just made by building administration, but we consult with Mr. Loomis, the district climate coordinator, about what steps need to be put in place, and what exactly comes about from any investigation.
And when it comes time to fill out the paperwork, either myself or Mr. Maloney, whoever's the administrator involved initially with that report, we'll walk the parents through any information they may have questions about, including the district policy, as well as the paperwork that needs to be filled out and what's necessary.
Okay, so there could be bullying that results in safety plans, but not necessarily verified bullying that gets reported up at a state level.
Correct, like it's, there's a, whether or not it's verified or unverified bullying, if there's been, something that's taken place that's caused a rift between two students, there's a good chance we'd put a safety plan into place. We'd take additional steps to ensure both students' safety and to ensure that they both feel comfortable coming to the building, whether or not it's verified or not.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Ms. Corso?
Moran has approximately 580 kids. How many are at DAG? I think I missed that.
75 more.
653. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Ross, is your question been asked?
Yeah, I've still got a couple questions on discipline data. I noticed we've had a total of 41 suspensions done by 25 students. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. So some students are obviously being suspended multiple times.
Correct.
At what point do we say enough?
I mean, when it comes to that data that's on there, the 30 total students receiving ISS or OSS, that could be, those aren't typically both, let's say, 5 days out, where it's become, a real safety issue for other students in the building. It's, a day here, 2 days here. I think the data only shows what we're doing in terms of the actual consequences. It doesn't really show what else we're putting in place, whether how much we're working with the parent, which support staff members they're working with. There obviously is a point in which, depending on what the offense is, there are a point in which you consider certain, that you decide the suspensions aren't enough. But that wasn't the case last year. We kind of look at progressive discipline, where we start off by saying this is a first offense, and we take into account if it's a second offense or not. But I don't think we really get to the point too often when we say enough is enough. I think it's more of, what if we see that a student is being suspended multiple times. I think it's foolish to kind of think like, oh, if I give them one more, I know this will make a huge change. So I think it's really about what the approach is going to be from the adults, what plans are put into place throughout the school day to try and address those behaviors. Sometimes I think it's providing those students with an opportunity to kind of get any anxiety or stress or frustration they're feeling out in a safe environment where it's not, exploding in front of a class, where it's not saying something you shouldn't be saying to an adult in the building, and putting other things into place so that we can avoid any missed time out of class and out of the school.
Yeah, so when you look at a student has multiple suspensions, so the same student, multiple events, that's when we start to look at where is the event occurring? Is it always in the classroom? Is it in the hallways? Is it based on other students' interactions? Is it based on adult-student interactions? And then we start putting targeted interventions in place to try to look at, can we mitigate these problems? Can we give some support to the student? So that occurs really instantly. I mean, when you say, when is it enough? After that first suspension, if a student has gotten to that level where they've caused an event or created an event where they need to be removed from the school building, that's when we're immediately really looking at trying to target what is the problem? What can we do to support the student better? Is it utilizing new tools in the classroom for that kid? Is it holding a group meeting? Is it some of the outside supports that Dr. Menzo referenced? So it's really instantly that it happens. But unfortunately, we do have repeat events, no matter how many interventions we put in place, but we still continue to work and work and work. Communicate with our elementary colleagues, communicate with our high school colleagues, try to come up with strategies they've used with kids in similar instances. So it's really a team effort no matter what, as soon as the kid gets suspended multiple times.
Do we report these to Youth and Social Services at some point?
As needed, certain behaviors are reported to Youth and Social Services. Not all,
No,
of course.
yeah,
But yes, we do utilize their services as well. Again, as Mr. Snyder referenced, we use the Wallingford Police Department, the Youth Division, because they have that different approach than we can do as well. So yeah, any resource that'll help, absolutely.
Have we had a problem with vaping in the school? I don't see any data here in that.
Does it occur? Yes. Is it a widespread problem? I would say no. When it was first became a larger issue and highly publicized, it was sort of like a fad, a very unhealthy fad. Have we seen less of it? Yes. We've done a lot of things, a lot of education. It's incorporated into our health curriculum now. So we do a lot of education through that. We've brought in organizations from Yale to talk to our adults about what to look for and some of the harmful pieces to it. But it does exist. I don't think, I won't speak for the high school, but I don't think it's on the level of the high school. But yeah, it does exist, and we definitely do a lot of education with it. We look out for it. But it's an unfortunate consequence, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Anybody else? All right, I just had one quick thing. You talked about the transition from 5th to 6th grade and how it's tough. And the high school said the same for 8th to 9th, and they're doing the freshman academy, and they seem to think it's going well. Do you have any thoughts about that in the future of doing something for 5th graders, similar idea?
We do. We have the bridge.
Yeah.
We have the Summer Bridge Academy.
So you have the Bridge
Transition from
Academy.
5th to
Okay,
6th
that's
grade.
right.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that has been
And you,
tremendously successful. The students have taken advantage of that opportunity. We have to take advantage of that opportunity.
so you have taken, and you feel it's working well.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Those are two different things, though.
Right, but I'm talking
Okay,
about.
I just want to make
working
sure
on-
everyone's clear on that, because high school also does the Summer Bridge Academy for 8th graders going into 9th
Right.
grade. The freshman academy occurs during the school day, the first the first few months of school.
Yeah, I was only
and-
speaking to the transition from 5th
Right.
to 6th, and that's a reason.
So I just wanted to make sure it was clear to the public and to the rest of the board that they are two different things.
All right, anybody else? All right, we're going to let you go. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Okay, I think Sheehan. Hello.
So I'm Enzo Zacco, principal at Sheehan. Mr. Dirksen, assistant principal at Sheehan. So we'll get into our school improvement plan. It was developed through a data-driven decision-making process, as you've heard multiple times tonight. The improvement goals involve a collaborative effort across disciplines, and the analysis of data focuses on student achievement results, on common department rubrics, district rubrics, of course, STAR assessment, SAT, PSAT, and SAT assessment. And we've also added our additional transferable skills graduation standards for this year. This is a new thing that, I mean, they've been around, but we're adding them to our school improvement plan. We're going to be looking at students reaching mastery of our transferable skills graduation standards much more closely. So our STAR data, we have our reading and our math data up there. And again, I did include percentages for the 9th and 10th graders for the reasons, obviously, that you've been asking. We did include our on-watch and intervention categories as well in both the reading and the STAR. I did not include it as we got to the juniors and seniors as a result of kids testing out. If you noticed, we have more kids the junior year testing out in math than we did in the reading portion. And then by 12th grade, we have less students taking the STAR.
That's really clear.
Our PSAT and SAT data, Mr. Dirksen did a nice job putting this together. So we have, going back, our 2020 cohort, which is our current seniors, going back to their freshman year, they took the 8-9 PSAT. We did include that as well. It's slightly different than the other PSATs they take in sophomore and junior year, but it's basically their PSAT and SAT data from their freshman, sophomore, junior, and junior year. And just so you're clear, that junior year they take the PSAT in the fall and then the actual SAT in the spring. And as Lyman Hall talked about, we do see some nice growth there throughout those 3 years. Obviously, many of them will take it their senior year in the fall. It's not through the school, but it's obviously offered here in Wallingford, but not during the school day. But certainly, we'll take a look at that data when we get it. So we've seen some nice growth. The first category is in the reading and writing, and then the second one is in math, and then of course the total. So again, some nice growth throughout the years. Do we want more growth? Of course. When you compare the seniors to last year's seniors, I didn't include it here, but I did write it down. Last year's, the 2019 cohort compared to 2020, we did go up 11 points in the reading writing with this year's seniors, and we went up a whopping 1 point in the math. So, of course, pretty good growth, but we want to, of course, do better. As far as our school improvement plan, our SLOs, our student learning outcomes, similar to Lyman Hall, again, increase our ability to comprehend literary and informational texts. And I'm not going to read through everything. We basically do that in a variety of ways. We want to see students achieving mastery on common department rubrics, district rubrics, of course, STAR data. We want our students to reach that growth band of 40 to 60. And then our transferable skills. And I can get a little more into those transferable skills in just a second. I'm not sure how familiar you are with those. That is a link to them. I know it's not blue like we normally see links. Basically, what we did was, as we looked at our school improvement plan, we said which ones of our transferable skills that go across disciplines make the most sense for comprehending literary and informational texts. So it's okay. So it's rather small, obviously. So the ones, there's 3 categories. We have, as far as our transferable skills, and each category has multiple indicators. So we have effective communicator, problem solver, and informed thinker. So as far as this SLO on reading comprehension, it was most closely tied to informed thinker, and in particular those 2 indicators. And this is also important to Sheehan High School because we went through the NESNC process about 5 years ago, and one of the recommendations was, and it's a good one, is that we need to implement those transferable skills across disciplines and across departments. And so last year we spent a lot of time deciding which departments are going to take more ownership over certain indicators than others. Not that other departments can use them all, but we certainly wanted to kind of place emphasis with certain courses and certain departments with particular areas. And so we have those indicators there. The second SLO has to do with increasing our ability to communicate effectively in writing. And again, we do that in a variety of ways, on common department rubrics, writing rubrics as well as district writing rubrics. So social studies, English are obviously two big departments, but also science. That second, I think it's the second bullet, let me see, yep. Students will improve their achievement by reaching a level of mastery on the conclusion portion of the scientific explanation scoring criteria. So science teachers had noticed that kids were not, they wanted to improve kids' ability to really do well on that conclusion component when doing labs and develop their writing in that area. So the science department has certainly taken that, that goal, and many teachers have chosen that specific goal, and they're going to measure that goal, and they want more kids to reach mastery level by the end of their year consistently. That third bullet has to do with world language, achieving that level of mastery in their target language on common writing rubrics across the world language department. And then again, we went through all the transferable skills, and we said the ones that connect most strongly to writing are under effective communicator and those specific 3 indicators. Our last SLO has more to do with the math science areas, so all students will improve in their ability to apply mathematical concepts to a range of contexts, interpreting data, and solving a variety of problems, utilizing practical and creative strategies. So here again, the Math Star. We want kids to hit that 40 to 60 SGP. And then again, science comes up. Once again here, they have I'm taking a look there, data analysis rubric, where when they analyze data in their labs, they then have to reflect on that data. And so the science department is really focusing on that within the SLO, it mentions interpreting data within those commas. And so that kind of really hits that area. And then again, the transferable skills, the 2 points that is the problem solving standard, and within that standard, those specific indicators tied the most to this SLO. So we chose those. Our school climate data, we have been taking this very seriously since I came last year, and we have our school climate committee works collaboratively with our entire faculty. So we kind of start at that school climate committee level, looking at last year's data, and last year we looked at the year before. And then we also, at faculty meetings, work with the entire faculty to pick specific indicators that we want to improve on. So as you can see, that first one, we did improve from the year before, but again, 62% isn't anything to brag about. So we would like to have more kids respond that they feel comfortable sharing their thoughts and ideas at school. The second one, trusted adults in the building, that went down slightly, and we want to see that turn around. And we can talk about some strategies that we'll implement in a second as well. And then the parent climate survey indicators that we chose, that first one, my child likes to come to school each day, did go down a little bit when parents answered that. And the next one, I feel there are trusted adults. That one jumped up quite a bit. Very proud of that one, and we want to maintain or increase that one. As far as our social emotional, before we get into that, some of the things, of course, we're doing to try to hit those climate indicators. Our advisory program, we've really stepped it up. We don't do the freshman academy as Lyman Hall does, but we target our advisory. Sometimes our advisory lessons do target certain grade levels, and really hitting those freshmen with specific lessons that would benefit them the most. We've also in advisory to connect kids to each other, have teamed up freshman advisories with junior advisories, sophomore advisories with senior advisories to do some nice team building activities. So that's another area that we've wanted to improve. We've done quite a bit with our advisory committee there as well. As far as moving on to social emotional goals, we also instituted the Sandy Hook Promise program, and we started with they have 3 components that they're going to introduce over several years. So the first program was Start with Hello, and that really focuses on student social isolation and inclusion. And so they came in and worked with all our grade levels, 2 different assemblies. And then Mr. Dirksen works with Mr. Wasbrock, one of our science teachers, to take Mr. Dirksen does a great job with our emerging leaders group, and he had them go to a training. Mr. Dirksen, do you want to talk to that at all?
I can just say a little bit about it in that because there's a few programs that kind of relate to some of those goals that were just listed there. ways that, especially increasing trusted adults in the building and trying to get more student awareness as to who they can go to and for what reason and for what different similarities they may have aside from, I like math class. It's finding new ways for them to look at a teacher and like, oh, that teacher likes the same sports team I do, or likes that same music artist, and kind of finding new ways to share that information out. We have a group of, right now, about 16 to 20 students who are taking this on, and they have a lot of large ideas that they want to, one, get started very quickly, and they want to sustain. So ways that they can show how they're all connected, as simple as today, for example, I was looking at how much it's going to cost to buy paint, because I want, part of the recommendation from these students was they want to put a big poster of their handprints in the buildings, that they're all in, like, they want to make their mark. They want to show that Sheehan's together. They want to put their handprints all over the building. That's something that they really want to do, and so we're going to try to make it happen. As ways to show that there's a connection that they have, and then connect that with the adults that they have in the building as well. And this is, again, 16 to 20 students who are very adamant about this work and want to make sure that it happens and that it stays in the building.
And I think our goal over this, especially in my second year and working with the team, is to spruce things up a little bit, show a little more school spirit, and we've done some of that in the senior court. We've added some nice colors, and we're going to do that throughout the hallways as well. There's a few different things in the works that we're working on to make Sheehan a little more welcoming place, a little more school spirited, and to get kids involved, as Mr. Dirksen just described. So that was one program we implemented. Our school social worker has done a fantastic job. She's created these new student groups for new students to our district and to Sheehan. And she's done these great activities, including scavenger hunts with some of these kids. And so we're gonna survey those students on how they've acclimated to Sheehan High School as a result of that great work that she's been doing with them. And then, of course, the work of our SRBI and student assistance team. We meet monthly with our student assistance team. It's made up of myself, the assistant principal, school counselors, and the social worker. And we run attendance reports, and we've also run academic reports. The first couple that we did so far, we focused on the attendance piece a little bit more. And so we want to reduce the number of students that go to credit appeals at the end of the first semester and then at the end of the year. And at the end of the year, it's the full year courses and the second semester courses. So we want to see a small reduction in those students as well. And then lastly, I've been working, I sent our school social worker as well as another teacher to shadow it's called the Truth About Hate program. Another school district does that, works with the Anti-Defamation League. And so it was a half-day training that the other school district allowed our people to go to at no cost, which was great. And then they went to the full program, and we're looking to implement that as well to help with that school climate.
All right, any questions? Ms. Corsa?
Back to your first SLO, you talked about sending English and social studies departments to a college board workshop, which I think is awesome, that they're both taking some ownership in preparing for the PSATs and SATs. And I know we talk a lot about standardized tests are only one data point, but I do think especially the SAT is very important because it's what our district is assessed by. So I'm wondering if there's opportunity for math and science teachers to attend similar college board workshops.
That workshop is on November 6th, and it's offered by CAS, the Connecticut Association of the Schools. That one in particular was for English and social studies teachers. So there was no offering for math and science, but I'll certainly keep my eye out for that. But we have 6 teachers going.
Okay, anybody else? All right, I loved how you had the connected to school throughout this whole thing, which I think is really important. And you talk about, how students are less connected, have more emotional distress, violent, deviant behavior and all that. My question is, are you tracking any way to show how students are connected to school, other than showing up on attendance?
The school climate data is big, so this will be a year where we're going to be asking the full climate survey.
Okay.
And then the health survey that just occurred just recently. Mr. Dirksen, anything else that you want to jump in? Discipline data, of course.
I mean, discipline data helps with that as well. To go back to kind of what I the other opportunities that we offer them to be a part of the school and what the number, are in terms of how many students are involved in clubs and activities, extracurricular activities and sports teams and so forth. Looking at that number is a good way to see how students are connected to the building and where they find their interests, and that we make sure we have the clubs and activities that can support the varied interests of our students.
Or even the opposite, the kids that are having difficulty, are they connected or not connected?
Yeah, and to speak to that again, I'll kind of talk about that this group of very motivated students we were just talking about how kids are in the building, and they identified 2 areas of need that they thought really were important to high school students, and said that it's the kids who aren't involved in these in the many offerings that are at the school are the ones that they really want to get to be a part of more things. So it's definitely even a focus of the students in the building that they know that these students, that there's a group they want to affect, and they want to affect positively to bring them more into the school.
Okay, super. Ms. Costelli.
So I'm struggling a little bit with just my own understanding of the STAR assessment from the perspective of, I'm thinking, and I could be wrong, but when at the high school level, I would assume the STAR assessment is then assessing kids at the skill set they should have at the high school level. In other words, that would be very different from what a kid at the grammar, the elementary levels would have.
Correct.
So you've now, they take this STAR assessment as a high school student, and they range wherever they fall. They've met the standard, or they're falling. They need help. Do we then take their ERLA measurement into account to see, like, in other words, I know that there are some high school students that are reading at a much lower level than high school level. How does that play in with the STAR assessment? And, in other words, let's just say that they're reading at a 5th grade level. Do we then try to give them a STAR assessment at grade level, at a 5th grade level, to see? Why are you laughing?
He's laughing at me.
I looked over at Mr. Thor, who was ready to go.
But you know where I'm going with this?
I
It's
do.
kind of like, so help me out.
So the STAR is an adaptive test. So for a student who sits down, it will adjust the questions based on the STAR level. So from that lens, it doesn't, wherever the child is functioning, whether they're in 5th grade or high school.
It will go all that way down, okay.
It will meet the child where they are.
Okay.
And continue to, ask questions that are more challenging. And if, the child gets it wrong 1 or 2 times, then it'll drop them down. So from that lens, it gives a really good picture of where the child is individually. We don't do the ERLA in high school.
We don't do
We
the
do
ERLA.
not.
And then the interventionists also do some in-house assessments to
Correct.
try to compare how they did on STAR to a homegrown test that they also give students to see kind of where they're at and if there's a discrepancy as well. So that's another measure that they do, along with how they're doing in classes, along with teacher reports. But there is another measure to an in-house assessment as well.
And
So
again,
the
I'm not concerned
interventionist-
about the scores. I'm concerned about, like I said, it's a tool
Sure.
to help identify these kids that need the help, and how the heck are we going to help them?
Right, so the interventionists have access to the ERLA for those students who are in intervention to get a kind of a diagnostic view as to where they are in reading and where they're falling down on. There are other informal assessments that can be done with a student to determining, where they are. So, they'll use many different forms of assessment and data points to try to ascertain really where the level of growth needs to be and where the areas for continued work are, and they'll target those.
Mr. Ross.
Yeah, I don't see any school data in the report. Do you have that?
Yeah, we did not include that. It wasn't part of our school improvement plan. We could certainly give you that. I'm not sure if Mr. Dirksen wants to make any comments, but we could certainly give you that.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, I think you're done.
Thanks.
All right, and then we have grade 6-12 humanities.
Good evening. I'm Carrie Laudadio, the Secondary Humanities Coordinator. And I'm going to build off of the data that was presented by the 4 schools that I work with across the humanities. The teachers that are included in the humanities department are English language arts, social studies, fine arts, reading intervention, and library. And so in the plan that you were provided, it was developed through the ongoing work with not only the teachers and conversations with teachers through a variety of different committees, such as management team, department meetings, PLG conversations, department leader conversations, but it was also developed through a needs assessment through the development of the curriculum, taking a look at the various stages that the curriculum in those areas are in, and then planning next steps for them. And so I tried to keep my slides fairly brief to try to connect the different areas of the humanities. We really have been taking a look the last couple of years at good instruction and the engagement of students in key skills to help them continue to build in the areas that the schools have just presented on, in the areas of literacy, reading, and writing. And then our transferable skills, looking at informed thinking, effective communicator, resourceful problem solver. And so areas that we do that are through the mastery-based system that we've been building in the district, and really taking a look at formatively. We've talked a lot about standardized data, but really looking at where the rubber hits the road in the classroom on a day-to-day basis. And we have been focusing on doing that through a lot of, and this is how we look at social and emotional learning through the curriculum, is more of a individualized student conference approach or small group approach, and really spending time with students, having conversations with them about who they are as readers and writers, what they enjoy. We will take summer reading data, and teachers will pull from that what kind of genres students like to read, what level of reading material they're gravitating towards, if they tend to gravitate more towards informational or literary text. Tying together the social studies and the language arts this year has been a really rewarding experience thus far, in terms of pulling in, when you really drill down in our STAR data, our SBA data, informational text tends to be an area that students don't perform as well in as literary text. So really thinking about ways that we can enhance reading in the content area, building up classroom libraries and text resources through the social studies. And so that's been all tied together through not only mastery-based learning, but the Wallingford teaching and learning model that we developed and have rolled out with teachers this year, looking at high-impact teaching strategies and what research supports in terms of getting the most progress and gains for students in the classroom. And then the instructional coaching I put on there. So while we don't have official instructional coaches at the secondary level, I've been working a lot with my leadership team, my subject area coordinators, and my department chairs, together with myself, in taking an instructional coaching approach when we meet with teachers, when we're visiting classrooms, through professional development, and really having some really engaging conversations about instruction. So this all ties back to, the curriculum is one piece of what I do, but really it's the instruction and how we're structuring the day-to-day. Over the last couple of years, we've been really taking a look at maximizing instructional time, really honing in on, through class visits, how much of that literacy block or the instructional time students are engaged building independence. We've had a lot of conversations with teachers in all of the departments on how do you build intrinsic motivation in students. And as you get up in the grades, the intrinsic motivation tends to be more of a struggle. The teachers have such good intentions about wanting students to learn the material that they're teaching, but how do we build that? And by building in longer periods of independent practice time in our instructional blocks is one way that you can approach that, to have students relying more on themselves and they're more actively engaged throughout the class time. Yeah, thank you. So the so the data across the district, consistently, we tend to score fairly steady in reading. We make similar gains. Somebody said earlier, how we tend to show consistent dips from summer slide, moving up somewhere around November, meeting, a certain percentage of growth by the spring, tends to be fairly consistent. One way that we are approaching trying to move students further along in the area of reading is building on a wide variety of research to look at volume of reading, reading with a purpose, and engaging students more individually based on their interests and level. So implementing the reading workshop units in the middle school that I brought through for you to review last year, we are in year 1 of implementing those. And so those units have restructured in some ways how the 68-minute classes are being chunked out in the middle school, looking at a very concise, focused mini lesson. Through the gradual release model, teachers are providing guided practice in reading skills and then ensuring that there's a set time for independent practice during those class periods. In addition, it ties in more choice for students in what they're reading. Teachers have been doing extensive professional development on how to coach students into books based on some of the pieces of data that I mentioned already, genres of books students like, or the level of book, or if they're interested in having a book club with a peer group that has a similar interest in an author study, for example. So really focusing on capitalizing on student interest, but also pushing students a little further beyond maybe where their comfort level has been and getting them to progress in that way. This year, we're reviewing and revising high school English curriculum units to incorporate some elements of the reading workshop in. The district's been very supportive over the last 2 years in bringing in national literacy consultants, Kate and Maggie Roberts. Last year, Kate Roberts worked with our high school department to review elements of the workshop model that's appropriate for high school. We recently had a very large visiting team visit another Connecticut high school, and their department was very collaborative and planned out the whole day for our teachers to be able to see the reading workshop in their classrooms, ask questions. They shared with us their journey. They also had worked with Kate Roberts as well, so it was a nice connection to make. And this year we are continuing our work with Kate and Maggie Roberts. Maggie's working with our middle schools on push-in coaching for the teachers in the reading workshop. We have our second day coming up on November 26th. We started with her in September, and Kate will continue her work for 4 days with the high schools this year, looking at the curriculum. And in social studies, very much in line with their Connecticut social studies standards, which are structured around an inquiry arc. They are looking at instructional focus on inquiry, reading in the content area, and social comprehension. Just to build a little bit off of one of the programs that Sheehan mentioned, social comprehension, looking analytically at social issues through that are thread, not only in social studies, but English language arts and all subject areas. We're starting to take a look at topics such as identity, diversity, acceptance, and taking a look at the body of students in front of you and how you then plan to instruct, depending on your audience, tough topics. And so tying together social issues and making some connections for students there. This year we're reviewing curriculum in social studies in grades 6 and 7 and 11. 6 and 7, world cultures and geography, grade 11, U.S. history. We're also doing a bit of an audit on our high school electives, just to kind of review which ones students have been interested in, which ones maybe are out there that we might want to consider, and kind of tighten that up a little bit, make sure we're offering the most relevant and interesting electives for students. And then a large piece of the work in the social studies department this year is working together with different organizations and people in the community on the Wallingford 350 Jubilee, and building that into daily lessons. A lot of our schools have done a really nice job of taking the 350 moments the department put together last year and finding ways to incorporate it into billboards or the library. There are several different opportunities for students to contribute artwork and writing pieces. So that not only I have it listed under social studies, but it really is cross-disciplinary, and teachers have been doing a really fine job of finding ways to incorporate it in not only daily, but school-wide and into the community.
Questions? Okay, Mr. Votto?
So, what kind of changes do you foresee for the grade 11 U.S. history?
So the grade, the grade 11 U.S. history, we would like to ensure that we have contemporary, modern U.S. history incorporated in to our 3-year sequence of U.S. history. And so I think that I'm sure you can relate to with U.S. history, the sequential approach to it tends to get a little bit heavy at times. So we are going to review different ways to approach the curriculum. Perhaps we've talked about over the years different ways to look at U.S. history, culminating with the most history up in the high school, perhaps thematically, where we're trying to really look at connections to students' lives today through the teaching of U.S. history and civic engagement. So I think looking for ways to have it be not only as contemporary as we would like our students to have that background knowledge going out into, beyond high school, but also connecting and having it be more relevant to their daily lives and finding the connections to the politics and the concepts.
But in regards to content, from what I gather, 8th grade stops at a certain place.
Yes.
Does the 11th grade history continue from that point?
It does.
Are they going to just do these thematic units?
It continues, and we would ensure that the sequence of the major periods are there. But I think what's missing right now is the relevance of the content for the students, and so finding ways for them to build more of a project-based approach to connections in their own lives through the content. So yeah, so we're going to continue with the sequence, but we're finding ways to have it be a little bit more applicable to their, their role in politics, their role in society, being stressing the importance of government and having their civic responsibility, those pieces that are in the standards that I think, because we haven't reviewed the curriculum since we adopted the new standards, is missing.
I've just been looking over the 8th grade curriculum, and I think they could have added a little bit more into it as far as content. But I do know children love 20th century American history.
They do.
They just seem to eat that up because they hear about these things.
Yes.
And I just would hate to see some of that stuff come out.
I definitely are not looking to shortchange the content. It's just more the approach. Again, back to the instructional approach we take with the content.
Now, we don't still have a civics class that they're required to take.
Grade 9 has a half-year required civics,
okay.
yes.
It's in grade 9,
Yeah.
all right. And so in that class, they would get the Constitution and that kind of
Yes.
thing. All right.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, Mrs. Levick?
How do you plan on using Jill Goldberg? Will she be used to help in unit development or in some other way?
I think that might be that's not in my plan. Is it?
Well, I'm looking at it, and she's
what
an
page?
art consultant on page 8.
I'm sorry. I thought you said Joe. I
No, Jill.
apologize, Karen. Jill Goldberg is a consultant that we have coming in to work with the art department. My apologies. She's starting with them tomorrow, and she'll be back again in March. She's going to be structuring her day tomorrow to look at the shifts. She's starting by contextualizing the shifts from the previous art standards to the new state-adopted art standards from a couple years ago. She's then going to develop a relevant scope and sequence with the department, looking at the state standards and the indicators that the department developed. And then she's going to be working with the teachers in grade band groups on curriculum that they've been working on over the last 2 years to give them some ongoing feedback so that they can continue to build their curriculum.
Okay, I was just wondering, because I saw that and I was wondering what her role was going to be.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? I just want to just make a quick comment. I know I already sent you an email about one parent, and actually I heard from another one. A couple of students now so far, because of the change in the readers workshop, have come back saying that language arts is their favorite class. And it's because they've been given student choice, and then they have these book clubs where they can actually sit and talk with people, and it seems to be, from what I'm hearing, it's working. The kids are getting excited about it, so congrats. That's
I
all.
appreciate the feedback. Thank you. I've heard similar as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. You have another section to go through, or are you
Nope,
good?
that's it. I just was
Okay,
making
any
sure
other
I was all
questions?
set. Okay, thank you.
Yes. All right. Kim, you're up. Global awareness.
Okay. So similar to Ms. Laudadio, I tried to keep my slides brief and really more so to just keep me on track than anything else. But you're able to reference any data that you would like from the plan, obviously. So in the area of world language, something that continues to rear its head on district performance assessments, but now that we have the seal of biliteracy and we have this normed national assessment, is a discrepancy in the area of interpersonal speaking. So our students feel very comfortable reading, writing, and listening with the language. But when it comes to unrehearsed, spontaneous speaking, this is somewhere that we struggle. So instructionally, embedding multiple opportunities for students to do that into a given class period is something that we really started to focus professional development on last year. Equipping teachers with the ability to deliver a modified oral proficiency interview to a student during a class, and even equipping teachers with the ability to turnkey that on a smaller level and teach students how to probe one another to that degree in just interpersonal banter in the classroom. So this is a big shift for us. The seal of biliteracy is something that shows us this data in black and white. So if you were able to look at our seal of biliteracy data on page 3, you'll see that first year of the students that didn't pass the seal of biliteracy, for 50% of them, that was the one module. And there are 4 modules, so it's a disparity. That was the one module that held them back. Last year, for 74% of our students that didn't pass, that was the module that held them back. And we have even more recent data in right now. We administered a round of the seal of biliteracy assessment on October 20th, the morning of the PSATs, for this year's current seniors, many of whom took it last spring as juniors, but we had 32 seniors test this past October, and of the 9 that didn't meet the mark, for 7 of them, it was the speaking. So we're trying also to really use those scoring rubrics that the Apple provides that give the students a really nice, kind of really laid out comprehensible things to think about. If they're scoring at an intermediate 1 and they need to score at an intermediate 3, what does that mean? They should be using connectivity in their sentences. It maybe means that they're not asking the person back a question. That would be a natural next step. I was in a 6th grade classroom today, and the teacher is really working this year on feedback and allowing students the opportunity to have interpersonal speaking opportunities with each other and then provide each other feedback right after the fact. And the feedback was so specific. And students were saying things like, my partner told me that I asked really great follow-up questions, or that I was able to answer multi-pronged questions. And this was in a 6th grade class. So when you think about what they have in their toolbox versus students sitting the test for the seal, to start to have those conversations in 3rd grade, 6th grade. These students don't just sit down and take this test when they're in 11th grade, right? So it's having those conversations and having them self-assess. But more importantly, it's us giving them the chance to just talk and use the language in unrehearsed, spontaneous ways. We're looking to obviously increase participation and success on the Seal of Biliteracy, especially in the 5 languages that we instruct here. The Seal is a wonderful opportunity to recognize our students who are native and heritage speakers of other languages. We actually have 2 who tested this past fall who will earn the Seal in 2 languages. So they'll be trilingual when they graduate with us, which is really cool. But, you know, to really ramp up the number of participants we have and successful recipients of the Seal of Biliteracy for our 5 languages that we instruct here. Our professional development, like I mentioned, has centered on those oral proficiency opportunities. Similarly with this department, we've identified, based on the high impact teaching strategies that we as a district identified over the last year, the World Language Department is very interested in the 2 of the 10 high impact teaching strategies of inquiry and questioning and metacognitive thinking. And those can pair really nicely together. So we're going to start tomorrow looking at an inquiry-based approach to grammar instruction and an inductive approach to grammar instruction, where students are more on their own, developing questions that they have when they see a pattern of grammar, and then doing their own research to kind of uncover the dirt rather than being explicitly told grammar rules and then, you know, filling it in. And then in the target language, be that English for our ELs, right, or be that the target language for our world language students, being able to explain that thinking in an interpersonal manner in the target language. We also were very proud that this past fall we had an exchange opportunity for our students that study Italian and Latin. So we now have some sort of international experience for all of our world language students for all 5 of the languages that we offer, be it a tour or an exchange. Even though those are very different experiences, they're very rewarding. We're also looking at how to take those opportunities and give them an extension piece to them, so that if students choose to pursue their mastery-based diploma assessment through these international opportunities that we have, they're able to do that. And some of these tour companies are coming up with opportunities for students to develop an inquiry-based inquiry project of their own to then seek out and complete while they're in these experiences, and then have a follow-up component to them. So those are some of our big goals that we have in the World Language Department. A lot of them do parlay over to the EL Bilingual Department, given that at its core, we're talking about second language acquisition and global awareness. So the professional development for this department as well is going to be focused on those interpersonal speaking opportunities with that guided instructor there. So the students having a chance to spontaneously use academic English with the teacher sort of serving as a guide. If you look at our Lost Links data from the last 3 years, we did not have great growth rate data in either the oral or the literacy composite area this past year, especially as compared to the 2 years prior. And the state has only been keeping the data for these 3 years, so this is relatively new to have matched cohort data at all. But another area of professional development for the EL Bilingual Department is going to be looking at that growth rate data at the student level. So not just saying, okay, we had X amount of students that exited, or, you know, we really need to peel back that growth rate data, and students who are missing the mark, where is it that they're missing the mark? Is it multi-pronged questions? Is it sounds? Is it, you know, what is it for that particular student, and how do we target individual instruction in those classes, which is a difficult thing because you're pulling students likely based on when you're able to pull them because of where they are during the day. So they're not necessarily heterogeneously grouped by need or by language ability in the 4 domains. So we need to look as a department at what is that growth rate data telling us about targeted areas of need for these students. And students will last years sometimes in one Lost Links level. And that's appropriate, and that can happen when they're meeting their growth rate data. But you can see that we didn't meet our growth rate data last year. So looking at that as a department. And in terms of kind of the social emotional piece for this department, we're looking to increase participation of these students and their families at our school-wide and town-wide events. So messaging those opportunities through the department and these teachers beyond the building administration. We find that a lot of times these families and these students feel most connected to that EL bilingual teacher at the school. So when he or she sends them an invite to something, when he or she says, we'll be there, when he or she says, we've gone through great lengths. I think as a district, we've come very far in terms of translating things into Spanish that go home, which is a huge accolade, and it's a huge undertaking. But we also need to be mindful of the comprehensible English that goes home as well, because these students and families, regardless of whether they're Spanish speaking or not, the comprehensible English piece is a next step for them. So as a department, we worked with Chris Stone and the other teachers with this CT STEM Academy at the townwide STEM night that we had in October, to make sure that if we could get our families through the door, that then they could self-navigate through those stations. And we looked at the directions that were put out on those tables and tried to boil them down and make them as comprehensible as possible, and make sure that there weren't, things there that could be taken one way or the other, or things that were sort of superfluous. So kind of beyond the translating piece, making sure that these families know that they're welcome to these events, and that when they're at these events, that we're there for them to make these comprehensible and accessible. Also having iPads there's a pretty cool app where you can just hover over font and it can loosely translate it into any language. You have to have Wi-Fi, which we don't always have everywhere that we are. But so that's a really cool thing. So for those families that aren't Spanish speaking, knowing that we have this tool and we're going to be there and this is who we are. So I've been present at the bilingual EL open houses thus far this year, and we're making a bigger push of having K-5 EL bilingual open houses, so that those parents of the younger students get a chance to meet who their students will likely still be being serviced by when they move into the 3-5 arena, so that they get to know us, and so they get to hear from us about these steps that we're taking, so that they recognize the level of inclusivity that we have for them and that we want for them. And Capstone being the third prong of the Global Awareness Department, this year we're going to continue to develop other opportunities for students to meet this mastery-based assessment diploma that the state has put forward for the class of 2023. Our Capstone program is a phenomenal way for students to do that. So you probably noticed that we went from last year, we had 1 student exploring that in an independent study, and this year we have 9 that are exploring that route. So continuing to grow that, messaging that to the freshmen in the Freshman Academy, using their English teachers and their social studies teachers and their guidance counselors and the scheduling assemblies, and really helping them to start to, at this stage, recognize that in the next few years they're going to have to do something of that ilk. So identifying as a department and with those students, what is it going to be that you would like to do as a summation of your learning that you're passionate about? And the timeline piece with the capstone being that looking at the actual physical capstone course, fitting that into the confines of one school year. So over the last few years, it has, I guess, spilled over, for lack of a better word, and the students have been able to demonstrate that final mastery in the fall of the following year, which is difficult for a few reasons, especially if something like this is going to be a graduation requirement. It needs to fit within the confines of a year so that we're able to say with confidence that students did or did not meet that benchmark. But definitely this year, a big push with the capstone department is looking to articulate other ways through extension of coursework in other arenas that we already have, where students can demonstrate this level of perseverance, resourcefulness, problem solving, beyond the physical course.
Okay.
Do you have any questions?
Any questions, anyone? Ms. Corso.
What is the total amount of EL students we have in our district right now?
We have 339.
Do you know how that compares to the total amount of EL students we had, say, 10 years ago?
It's a lot more. I don't have the percentage. I will send you the percentage, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but we have increased dramatically over the
We're at
last.
339 EL students, identified EL students.
Right now, yes.
There you go.
Yep.
And then beyond that, obviously, we have many who have exited, and then we
Right.
have many who are heritage and native speakers of another language that just never qualified for EL services.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? All right, I just have, it shows that you're removing the teacher recommendation from capstone?
And I think I was remiss to even say teacher recommendation. There's been a component where teachers have recommended, for lack of a better word, that a student enroll in the capstone course, but that hasn't been a precursor to him or her being able to enroll.
Okay.
It's just kind of, when you're looking at the massive amount of electives that there are for a student to take, teachers have taken the initiative to recommend students for capstone so that it maybe makes them look at it and say, oh, this is something that I would be a great candidate for, that I would like to do. So more mass messaging it to all students, because the fact that something of this caliber will be a requirement for our current freshmen is likely going to mean that we're going to have more students enroll in the physical course, because it's a sure bet. There's an incredible instructor that's there to shepherd you along through the experience to do this. So still having those one-on-one conversations with students that are a recommendation, but a recommendation is not a precursor to enrolling.
Do you ever anticipate using like the high school advisory to kind of send kids certain directions for capstone?
We have thought about that. Yeah. Of trying to use those people also as kind of the adult in the building that's ensuring that cohort of students has the steps in place to move towards this in time for graduation.
Okay.
But to have the bigger conversation about articulating the idea and the statement of problem and the statement of intent and the community benefit, that could certainly be something that advisory might be a platform for.
All right. Any other? Oh,
Just
Dr. Menzel.
the EL data, going back, sorry. I don't have 10 years, but, because I'll get that for you. But going back to what I have in front of me, back in 2013, we were at 269. So 269 students. And I believe prior to that, when I first arrived, I believe we were just around 200. But I'll get that data for you. So I know it's gone up at least on average about 75 to 80 students. And we increased the number of languages too, because we're up to, I believe, 43 languages. And back in 2013, or we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, so 35. So we're like 37 languages. So I think we're up to 43, and so we increased the number of languages also.
Do you know if that's unique to Wallingford, or is that a trend that we see across the state?
I would have to check into that. I know that suburban districts have not seen as much growth in the languages as much as we have in our DIRG. That I do know. And so I know that there's been an increase here. I don't know across the whole state, but I do know in terms of our DIRG, in terms of the diversity, in terms of EL students, we've seen a larger increase than most of our counterparts in our DIRG. Just like with free reduced lunch, we've seen a greater increase than those districts in our DIRG as well. So those are two important factors that we continue to identify. And I think actually at our business think tank meeting the other day, I kind of shocked some of the business leaders when I said, and Kathy was there, that's why I look it over here. Oops, did I do that? Oh, okay. Sorry, it just sounded like Steve Urkel. For those people who don't know who that was, Family Matters, Friday night show, when Friday nights were actually worth watching. The thing is that I shared with the businesses that many of them didn't understand that when we were talking about career readiness, that not that all students go to college, and they didn't understand the demographic changes. And I gave them, after the meeting, a couple people come up to me and I gave them some of the data and I referred them to our website, and they were amazed because they don't necessarily they don't see Wallingford in the same light that it is right now. So. But I'll look at the state data. I'm not sure about the EL across the state. We could get that off of probably Ed site.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes. So I'm sure you probably have it by the end of the meeting.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Okay. I think we can move on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Carrie? Ms. Latour, I should say.
Okay. So you have the first read of a regulation in front of you, and I promise to be quick because I know it's late. So the policy itself for homeless students that we have is a very straightforward policy. It needed no edits. The regulation changed due to changes in the state statute. So these are all just changes recommended by our attorneys based on changes to the state statute. So the shaded areas are what we're adding. The strikeouts are what we're removing. And this is the first read, so you have time to review it. You can contact myself, Kathy, Pat, or Mike at any point if you have questions or concerns, or you wish to do a different, words I can't make right now. And we'll see it again for a second read at the end of the month.
Okay.
Okay?
Does anybody get anything? Okay.
I do, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yep, good.
I'll be quick. How long are we responsible for a child or family who's homeless?
1 year.
1 calendar year, okay, that's what I thought. I was curious. Technically, how long are we responsible for?
Okay.
I didn't hear the answer.
1 calendar year.
1 calendar year,
Yeah.
thank you.
All right, anybody else? Okay, anybody here for public comment? Okay, with that, I'd say we're adjourned.